For centuries, history has been written in stone, but hidden in the shadows are the stories that were never meant to be told. Tonight, on Dark History, we open the gates to a chilling mystery that has haunted scholars for generations. The disappearance of Rome's legendary Ninth Legion, an army of thousands, gone without a trace. Was it slaughtered in the mists of Britain, betrayed by its own, or did it vanish into something far darker than history dares to admit? This is not just history. This is the shadow of the past calling to us. If you're ready to step into the darkness, uncover the secrets, and explore the legends that refuse to die, make sure you subscribe to Dark History, because the truth is far more terrifying than the myth. Chapter 1: Rome's Invincible Legions. The Roman Empire did not rise to greatness through diplomacy alone. At the heart of Rome's power stood its most formidable creation, the Legion. More than just an army, the Legion was a machine of war, discipline, and order that shaped the destiny of an empire stretching from the burning sands of North Africa to the misty forests of Britannia. To understand the mystery of the Ninth Legion, one must first understand the institution to which it belonged, the Roman army, the beating heart of Roman might, the foundations of Rome's power when Rome was still a city-state fighting for survival against rival tribes in Italy. It discovered something that would become its greatest weapon: organization. Other ancient peoples fought as loosely gathered warriors, united by blood or tribe, but Rome devised a system. Soldiers would train, drill, and obey strict commands. They fought not for themselves, but for Rome, and together they became far greater than the sum of their parts. By the time of the late Republic and early Empire, a Roman legion typically numbered between 4,800 and 6,000 soldiers, excluding auxiliaries. Each legion was divided into cohorts and centuries, carefully structured so that every soldier knew his place and every officer his responsibility. It was this intricate web of discipline and efficiency that allowed Rome to crush armies much larger than its own. The legionnaire himself was a professional soldier, bound to serve for decades. He was equipped with the iconic short sword, the gladius, a deadly stabbing weapon designed for close combat. His large shield, this gave him protection while allowing him to fight shoulder in the famous testudo, or tortoise formation. To an enemy, the sight of a Roman wall of shields advancing without hesitation must have been terrifying. But perhaps more terrifying than the weapons was the discipline. A Roman legion did not break. A legion did not rout easily. Each man was drilled to fight, to march, to build camps, and to die if necessary in the service of Rome. This was no militia of farmers turned warriors. This was a professional army, a brotherhood bound by oath, the prestige of the legions by the 1st century CE. The Roman legions were the most feared fighting force in the known world. Their reputation alone was enough to intimidate enemies, often winning battles before the first sword was drawn. Emperors relied on their legions not only to expand the empire, but also to secure their rule. A legion's loyalty could make or break a Caesar. Each legion carried with it a number, a title, and an identity. Some bore proud names, such as Ferreta, ironclad, or Victrix, victorious. Others were associated with regions, or emperors. These names carried honor, history, and pride. Soldiers identified themselves not just as Romans, but as members of their specific legion. To belong to a legion was to belong to a legacy. Among these legions was one with a story unlike any other, the Ninth Legion Hispana. Its name alone has stirred historians, novelists, and filmmakers for generations. For while most legions left behind clear records of their victories and defeats, the Ninth is remembered not for what it achieved, but for the mystery of its disappearance. The Ninth Legion Hispana, the origins of the Ninth Legion, stretch back to the days of the Roman Republic. Some scholars trace its foundation to Julius Caesar's campaigns in Gaul, around 58 BCE. If this is true, then the Ninth was born in an age of conquest, forged in the brutal wars that brought Rome dominion over France, Belgium, and beyond. The Legion's early title, Hispana, suggests that it distinguished itself in Spain, a land Rome struggled to tame for centuries. Spain was a land of fierce tribes, skilled warriors, and brutal resistance. For Rome to control it, they needed legions of resilience and strength, and the Ninth may well have earned its title there, the Spanish Legion. Over the years, the Ninth fought in Caesar's civil wars, marching across Italy, Spain, and even into Africa. After Caesar's assassination, the Legion survived the turbulent years of Rome's transformation from republic to empire, emerging as one of the trusted legions of Augustus, the first emperor. This was no ordinary military unit. This was a legion steeped in history, hardened by decades of blood and battle. The role of a legion in Rome's expansion to grasp the significance of the Ninth's fate. One must imagine what it meant for Rome to lose a legion. A legion was not simply a collection of men, it was an investment of time, money, and resources on an enormous scale. Each soldier had been trained, armed, and disciplined. Each unit carried its own standard, its Aquila eagle, which symbolized the honor of Rome itself. To lose an eagle was the greatest disgrace imaginable. To lose an entire legion was nothing short of catastrophic. When Rome deployed a legion, it was a statement of power. To station one in a province was to remind the local population of who ruled them. To march one into enemy lands was to declare war not just with men, but with the very embodiment of Roman might. The legion was Rome, and Rome was the legion, Rome's enemies, but even Rome's enemies were not to be underestimated. The empire was vast, and its borders were constantly under pressure from tribes and kingdoms that resisted Roman rule. In the forests of Germania, fierce warriors annihilated 3 legions at the Battle of Teutoburg Forest in 09 CE in the deserts of Parthia. Roman armies struggled against horse archers, who struck from afar and vanished before they could be engaged. And in Britannia, the misty, windswept island at the edge of the known world, Rome faced tribes as fierce as any it had ever encountered. The Ninth Legion would play a role in all these struggles, leaving a trail of both glory and blood in its path. Yet it is in Britannia that its fate would ultimately be sealed, for it is there beyond Hadrian's Wall, in the shadowy lands of the north, that the Ninth vanishes from history, the immortality of a mystery. Why does the story of the Ninth captivate us so deeply? Because we do not know the answer. Historians can trace its movements, its victories, and its garrisons up until a point, and then it disappears. Did it march into Scotland and meet its doom at the hands of native tribes? Was it redeployed elsewhere, in the empire, only to be destroyed in some forgotten campaign? Or was it disbanded quietly, its name erased from records, for reasons lost to time? The truth may never be fully uncovered. Yet the Ninth Legion's disappearance stands as a haunting reminder that even Rome, at the height of its power, was not invincible. Even the greatest army of its age could simply vanish into history. Conclusion of Chapter 1, In the Shadow of the Ninth's Fate. This opening chapter lays the foundation. We understand now what a legion was, why it mattered, and why the disappearance of a single one is so extraordinary. The Roman legion was more than an army, it was the symbol of Roman dominance, a manifestation of the empire's unyielding strength. For one to vanish was not just a military loss, it was an existential wound to Roman pride. As we move forward, we will follow the Ninth through its battles, its triumphs, and its long march into obscurity. And perhaps, in retracing its steps, we may come closer to unraveling one of the greatest mysteries of the ancient world. What truly happened to the Roman Ninth Legion? Chapter 2, The Birth of the Ninth Legion, the Roman Ninth Legion. Hispana is one of the most enigmatic military units in the history of the ancient world. To understand its disappearance, we must first go back to its birth, to the turbulent era of Julius Caesar and the fall of the Roman Republic. For the Ninth was not born in peace. It came into existence during one of the bloodiest, most chaotic, and most transformative periods of Roman history, the age of Julius Caesar. The Roman Republic, in the 1st century BCE, was a fragile entity, riddled with internal rivalries, political corruption, and the relentless ambition of its most powerful men. At its heart stood one figure whose name would forever shape history: Gaius Julius Caesar. By the 50s BCE, Caesar had been granted command in Gaul, a vast region covering what is now France, Belgium, Switzerland, and parts of Germany. It was here that he would wage his legendary Gallic Wars, campaigns that would not only expand the Roman Republic's territory, but also cement his personal power. And at the core of these campaigns stood his legions, loyal, disciplined, and battle-hardened. Among them, the Ninth Legion. The foundation of the Ninth. While the precise origins of the Ninth are debated among historians, evidence suggests that Caesar raised the legion around 58 BCE, at the beginning of his Gallic campaigns. Some accounts claim it had existed earlier, perhaps formed by Pompey the Great, and was later inherited by Caesar. But regardless of its exact origin, it was under Caesar that the Ninth earned its reputation. The legion's early campaigns were brutal. Gaul was not a land easily subdued. Its tribes were fierce warriors, skilled in ambush, cavalry maneuvers, and guerrilla tactics. They did not fight like the orderly Romans, but with ferocity and unpredictability. For Rome, every campaign was a struggle, not only against men, but against geography, the dense forests, rivers, and harsh winters of Gaul. Yet the Ninth adapted. They built fortresses, roads, and supply lines. They learned to anticipate the hit tactics of their foes. They became not just soldiers, but conquerors. The Ninth in Caesar's Gallic Wars. The Ninth fought in some of Caesar's most famous campaigns, including battles against the Helvetii, the Belgae, and the Arverni. But their most famous role may have been during the siege of Alesia in 52 BCE. Here, Caesar faced Vercingetorix, the great Gallic chieftain, who united the tribes against Rome in a last desperate stand. At Alesia, Caesar's legions, including the Ninth, constructed massive fortifications around the Gallic stronghold. Then, in a feat of engineering brilliance, they built a second wall facing outward to protect themselves from Gallic reinforcements. Trapped between these walls, Vercingetorix's army was crushed. The Ninth fought not only with swords and shields, but with shovels, picks, and sheer endurance. The victory at Alesia effectively ended Gallic resistance, and the Ninth had played its part. The Ninth in civil war. When Caesar crossed the Rubicon in 49 BCE, igniting civil war against Pompey and the Senate, the Ninth marched with him. Loyalty was everything, and the Ninth's loyalty to Caesar was unquestionable. They fought in the brutal campaigns in Spain, where Caesar defeated Pompey's legates at Alerta. They fought at Pharsalus in 48 BCE, where Caesar crushed Pompey himself. They even marched into Africa, taking part in Caesar's campaign against the remnants of the Pompeian forces. By the time Caesar emerged as the master of Rome, the Ninth was among his most seasoned and trusted legions. Their banners carried not only honor, but also the weight of countless campaigns. They had marched across continents, endured unimaginable hardships, and stood by Caesar in his rise to power. The Spanish connection. It was during these campaigns, especially in Hispania, modern Spain and Portugal, that the Ninth likely earned its honorary title. The Iberian Peninsula was a land of fierce warriors and endless resistance. Even after initial conquest, Rome faced decades of uprisings, guerrilla warfare, and tribal defiance. The Ninth distinguished itself in these brutal campaigns, fighting tirelessly to subdue the region. Spain was vital to Rome's future. Its silver mines fueled the empire's economy, and its fertile lands provided food for Rome's armies. The Ninth's efforts to pacify Hispania were not forgotten, and the name Hispana became attached to them, immortalizing their role in one of Rome's toughest theaters of war. from republic to empire after Caesar's assassination in 44 BCE, Rome once again descended into chaos. Civil wars erupted between Caesar's assassins, the liberators, and his heirs. Most notably, Octavian, who would later become Augustus, Rome's first emperor. The Ninth, like many legions, found itself caught in this struggle. At times, legions were disbanded, re-raised, or transferred between generals. The Ninth seems to have remained loyal to Caesar's successors, eventually becoming part of the imperial army under Augustus. By the time the dust settled, Rome was no longer a republic. The Senate still met, but power lay with one man, Augustus. Caesar. The legions, once loyal to individual generals, were now sworn to the emperor. They were stationed across the empire, not only as instruments of conquest, but also as guardians of Roman rule, and the Ninth was among them, a veteran legion with decades of experience, ready to serve the empire in new campaigns. The importance of legionary identity. Every legion carried its own history, traditions, and pride. Veterans trained new recruits, passing down stories of past battles and instilling in them the honor of belonging to their unit. Standards were carried into battle, eagles raised high, to the soldiers of the Ninth. They were not just Romans, they were the Ninth. Their reputation was theirs to uphold, their honor theirs to defend. The Ninth's early history gave it a prestige few legions could rival. It had marched with Caesar, fought in decisive battles, and earned an honorary title. It was not just another military unit, it was a symbol of Rome's expansion, its resilience, and its power. A legion forged in blood by the dawn of the 1st century CE, the Ninth had already lived through half a century of conflict. It had seen Caesar's rise and fall, Augustus's consolidation of power, and Rome's transformation from republic to empire. It had earned scars across Gaul, Spain, Africa, and beyond. It was a legion forged in blood, tempered by discipline, and defined by loyalty. But as with all Roman legions, its fate would be tied not just to the strength of its soldiers, but to the ambitions of emperors, the resistance of conquered peoples, and the unforgiving march of history. The stage is set. The birth of the Ninth Legion was not just the creation of a military unit, it was the birth of a mystery. For, though it began in glory, forged by Caesar himself, its story would end in silence, leaving historians and archaeologists to piece together fragments centuries later. As the Ninth prepared for new campaigns under the emperors, it could not know that its legacy would be defined not by its victories, but by its disappearance. A disappearance that would become one of the greatest historical enigmas of all time. Conclusion of Chapter 2. The Ninth Legion was born in fire, raised in an age of war, hardened in Gaul and Spain, and honored with a title that marked its reputation. By the time Augustus ruled Rome, the Ninth was no ordinary legion. It was a veteran force, a unit of prestige and pride. Its soldiers carried with them the legacy of Caesar himself. But as we turn to the next chapter, we must follow the Ninth into the early years of the Roman Empire, where it would be deployed to the furthest frontiers. For the Ninth's destiny was not to remain in the safe heartlands of Rome, but to march to the edges of the known world, toward the cold, hostile island of Britannia, where its fate would be sealed. Chapter 3. The Conquest of Britannia. The Ninth Legion Hispana, already seasoned by decades of warfare in Gaul, Spain, and the civil wars of Rome, would soon be tested in a land unlike any it had seen before, a land shrouded in mist, isolated beyond the Channel, and inhabited by fierce tribal warriors who painted their bodies blue, charging into battle with cries that chilled even hardened soldiers. This land was Britannia. The conquest of Britain was not simply another campaign in the Roman Empire's endless wars. It was a bold gambling attempt to expand Rome's influence into a territory that had resisted subjugation for centuries. For the Ninth Legion, it would become both a proving ground and a crucible of suffering. Prelude, Rome's first glimpse. Of Britain-Rome's relationship with Britain had long been ambiguous. Julius Caesar himself had twice crossed the Channel in 55 and 54 BCE. His expeditions were more symbolic than practical brief demonstrations of Roman power. Caesar fought skirmishes with the island's tribes, secured promises of tribute, and then withdrew. Yet the Romans never forgot Britain. Its tin, grain, slaves, and furs tempted Roman merchants. Its warriors sometimes served as mercenaries, and its distance from Rome gave it an aura of mystery. Roman writers described Britain as a foggy, almost mythical island at the edge of the world. For nearly a century, Rome did not attempt to conquer it. The empire had enough trouble consolidating Gaul, Iberia, and Germania, but by the reign of Emperor Claudius in 43 CE, circumstances had changed. The Claudian invasion, 43 CE Claudius, often underestimated in Roman history, sought military glory to legitimize his rule. A conquest of Britain would not only bring wealth and prestige, but also secure his political position in Rome. Thus, he ordered the largest invasion force yet assembled for Britain. The invasion force included 4 legions among them, the Ninth Legion Hispana, alongside auxiliary troops, cavalry, and supply trains. The force may have numbered as many as 40,000 men. They landed on the southeastern coast of Britain and began their slow advance inland. The Ninth was no stranger to tough campaigns, but Britain was different. Its thick forests, swamps, and unpredictable weather made marching in supply lines a nightmare. The tribes fought not in open fields but in ambushes, hit-and-run raids, and lightning-fast cavalry charges. The first battles, the early campaigns of the invasion, brought the Ninth into direct conflict with Britain's tribal confederations. One of the most formidable was the Cativalani, whose resistance threatened Rome's foothold. The Ninth fought in brutal engagements as the legions advanced north and west, carving out Roman control over the southeast. Claudius himself, arriving months later, staged a triumphal entry into Colchester Camulodunum, which became Rome's first colonia, or Roman settlement, in Britain. With the tribes subdued in the southeast, the Roman legions, including the Ninth, were stationed across the island to maintain order and prepare for further conquests. The Ninth. In the north, the Ninth Legion soon found itself deployed to the north of Britain, where resistance was fiercest. The tribes of modern-day Wales and northern England were defiant, refusing to bow to Roman rule. The Ninth fought grueling campaigns in this region, clashing with tribes such as the Brigantes and the Silures. The Brigantes, occupying the largest tribal territory in Britain, were a constant challenge. While some Brigantian leaders allied with Rome, others rebelled, drawing the Ninth into long, bloody conflicts. The Ninth established forts, built roads, and enforced Roman authority. Their presence was not just military, was political, symbolic, a statement that Rome's power extended even to the edge of the known world. But Britannia was not conquered easily. For every Roman advance, the tribes responded with uprisings. For every fort built, there were raids and ambushes. The Ninth was constantly tested, forced to endure endless skirmishes, harsh winters, and the psychological strain of fighting an enemy that seemed to appear and vanish like ghosts. The Great Revolt of Boudica, 60-61 CE. The true test for the Ninth Legion in Britain came not from the north, but from the east, in one of the most devastating uprisings Rome ever faced, the revolt of Queen Boudica. Boudica was queen of the Iceni, a tribe in eastern Britain. After the death of her husband, the Romans mistreated her and her daughters, sparking outrage across the island. The tribes united under her leadership, and in 60 or 61 CE, they rose in violent rebellion. The revolt was catastrophic for Rome. Boudica's forces descended on Camulodunum Colchester, burning the Roman settlement to the ground. They slaughtered men, women, and children indiscriminately. From there, they marched to Londinium, which was abandoned and then torched. St. Albans Verulamium followed, meeting the same fate by the time the rebellion reached its peak. Tens of thousands of Romans and Roman allies had been killed. Britain was aflame. The Ninth's defeat. The Ninth Legion Hispana was stationed in the region during the revolt. Its commander, Quintus Petilius Aurelius, marched with part of the legion to confront Boudicca's forces, but he underestimated the scale of the uprising. The Ninth's detachment was ambushed and annihilated. Ancient sources suggest that the infantry was wiped out almost entirely. Only Ceriolus and his cavalry managed to escape. This was a humiliation for Rome and a disaster for the Ninth. The loss of so many soldiers in one battle was devastating, both militarily and psychologically. For the Legion, it was a stain on their honor, a memory that would haunt their legacy. Roman revenge. Despite this disaster, the Roman governor Suetonius Paulinus regrouped. He assembled a smaller, disciplined force and confronted Boudicca's massive army in what became the decisive battle of the revolt. Through superior tactics, discipline, and the tight formations of the Roman legions, the rebels were crushed. Boudicca either took poison or died shortly after, and the rebellion collapsed. Rome reasserted control over Britain, though at the cost of massive destruction. The Ninth, however, carried the scar of their defeat. Though reinforced and rebuilt, their reputation had been tarnished. To lose a legionary force in battle was rare. To be nearly annihilated by tribal warriors was a humiliation. The Ninth rebuilt after the rebellion. The Ninth was replenished with new recruits. Roman legions were rarely allowed to simply vanish after defeat. Men were brought from the continent, veterans re-enlisted, and fresh soldiers filled the ranks. Over time, the Ninth regained its strength, but its position in Britain was precarious. The North was still rebellious, the Brigantes still restless. The Ninth would remain on the front lines, holding the frontier against an enemy that seemed impossible to fully conquer. Life on the frontier. For the soldiers of the Ninth, life in Britain was one of constant vigilance. They built fortresses of stone and wood, manned watchtowers, and patrolled roads. They clashed with raiders, defended supply lines, and endured the wet, cold climate of the island. Forts such as Eboracum, modern York, became key bases for the Ninth. From here, they controlled northern Britain, projecting Roman authority into hostile territory. Yet the more Rome pressed into the north, the more resistance it encountered. The land itself seemed to resist Romanization, its tribes fiercely clinging to independence. The symbol of the Ninth in Britain for Romans. The presence of the Ninth in Britain was a symbol of determination. The legion that had once marched with Caesar was now holding the line at the edge of empire. Its survival after Boudicca's revolt was proof of Rome's resilience. But for the Britons, the Ninth was a symbol of oppression, foreign rule, and relentless war. They saw the eagle standards as invaders, their forts as prisons, their soldiers as enemies who imposed taxes, laws, and punishments. The clash between these two perspectives, the pride of Rome and the defiance of Britain, would shape the Ninth's destiny. Foreshadowing the mystery, the Ninth's role in Britain during the mid-1st century CE was crucial, but it also set the stage for its later disappearance. The legion's repeated struggles in the north, its humiliating defeat under Boudicca, and its tenuous control of hostile territories all contributed to the uncertainty surrounding its fate. Would it be destroyed in another uprising? Would it be transferred elsewhere, leaving behind the hostile land it could never truly conquer? The Ninth's presence in Britain was both its greatest test and, perhaps, the beginning of its downfall. Conclusion of Chapter 3. The conquest of Britain was a story of ambition, brutality, and survival. For the Ninth Legion Hispana, it was a chapter of both glory and shame. They had helped Claudius secure the island, built forts that became Roman strongholds, and stood as Rome's line of defense against the tribes. Yet they had also suffered one of the worst defeats in Roman Britain, nearly annihilated by Boudicca's revolt. By the end of the 1st century CE, the Ninth was deeply entrenched in Britain. They had become part of the island's history, both as conquerors and as symbols of resistance. But the story was far from over, for beyond the northern hills, in the land of the Brigantes and the Caledonians, greater challenges awaited. The Ninth's destiny would not be written in Rome's marble forums, but in the windswept frontiers of Britain, where legions vanished and legends were born. Chapter 4. The Brigantes and the northern frontier. The Ninth Legion Hispana had endured humiliation at the hands of Boudica, but Rome was not a power that tolerated failure. Rebuilt, reinforced, and stationed once more in Britain, the legion was thrust into another storm, this time against the greatest tribal confederation in the north, the Brigantes. If the Iceni rebellion had been the Ninth's baptism of fire in Britain, then the struggle against the Brigantes was their endless war, a grinding conflict fought not in a single decisive battle but across decades, in the windswept hills, valleys, and forests of northern England. This was the true frontier, and here, the Ninth would both forge its identity and edge closer to its mysterious fate. The Brigantes, Rome's most dangerous foe in Britain. The Brigantes were no ordinary tribe. They controlled the largest single territory in all of Britain, spanning much of what we now call Yorkshire, the Pennines, and stretching north toward Hadrian's eventual wall. Their lands were fertile, their population large, their warriors numerous. Unlike smaller tribes, the Brigantes were not a simple enemy. They were divided, fractious, capable of both diplomacy and rebellion. Some of their leaders allied with Rome, seeking prestige and protection. Others rejected Roman authority entirely, leading uprisings that dragged on for years. To conquer the Brigantes was to conquer the heart of northern Britain. For Rome, this was essential not only to secure the island, but also to ensure that the north would not become a constant source of rebellion. For the Ninth Legion, it was a challenge that would define their very existence in Britain. A fragile alliance, Queen Cartimandua and Rome first pushed northward. It found an unexpected ally among the Brigantes, Queen Cartimandua. Cartimandua was a shrewd and ambitious ruler. Unlike many tribal leaders, she recognized the strength of Rome and chose to align herself with the empire. Her loyalty was demonstrated most dramatically when she handed over the fugitive British leader Caratacus to the Romans in 51 CE. Caratacus had fought Rome fiercely for years, becoming a symbol of resistance. When he sought refuge among the Brigantes, Cartimandua betrayed him, delivering him in chains to the governor Publius Ostorius Scapula. Caratacus was paraded in Rome as a prisoner, and Cartimandua was rewarded with prestige and Roman backing. For a time this alliance kept the north relatively stable. The Ninth, stationed in the region, benefited from her cooperation. Yet this stability was fragile, built not on unity among the Brigantes, but on the will of a single queen. The downfall of Cartimandua Cartandan reign, however, was plagued by scandal and internal conflict. She divorced her husband Venutius, and scandalously took his armor-bearer as her consort. In the tribal world, where loyalty, honor, and kinship were sacred, this act ignited outrage. Venutius, humiliated and enraged, became the rallying point for anti-Roman sentiment. He raised rebellions against Cartimandua, splitting the Brigantes into factions: those loyal to Rome through the queen, and those who saw her as a traitor and turned to Venutius. For the Ninth, this division was disastrous. Instead of facing one unified enemy, they faced a civil war that repeatedly destabilized the north. Each rebellion of Venutius drew Roman forces into the hills, forcing them to fight on terrain that favored the Brigantes. Cartimandua clung to power only because Rome propped her up. Each time Venutius struck, legions had to march north to rescue her. The Ninth was among those repeatedly tasked with these operations, suffering ambushes, grueling marches, and the constant attrition of fighting an enemy who seemed to melt into the forests and hills. By the late 60s CE, however, Rome had grown weary of Cartimandua's weakness. When Venutius finally launched a full-scale uprising, Rome intervened decisively. Cartimandua was whisked away to safety, effectively deposed. The Brigantes fell fully into rebellion, and the Ninth was now on the front line of an all-out war. Life on the northern frontier for the legionaries of the Ninth. The wars with the Brigantes defined daily life. They marched through endless rain, mud, and fog, building forts in hostile territory. Every fort was a statement. Rome was here to stay. Eboracum, modern York, became the Ninth's most important base. From here, they could strike out into Brigantes territory, supply their outposts, and monitor the north. The fortress was immense, with stone walls, barracks, granaries, workshops, and the ever-present headquarters housing the Legion's sacred eagle standard. But beyond the walls, danger lurked. Everywhere, Brigantian raiders attacked supply trains, ambushed patrols, and struck at isolated forts. Legionaries lived with constant anxiety, knowing that any march into the countryside might end in sudden death. The frontier was not a static line, it was fluid, shifting, contested. Roman roads stretched like scars across the landscape, but they were never safe. The brutality of Rome's answer to Brigantian resistance was ruthless. The Ninth, like other legions, conducted scorched earth campaigns, burning villages, slaughtering livestock, and destroying crops. The goal was to break the will of the people, to starve them into submission. For the Brigantes, Rome's presence was an endless nightmare. Their lands were scarred by forts, their people enslaved or displaced, their leaders divided between appeasers and rebels. And yet, the Brigantes never broke completely. Rebellion flared again and again. The Ninth could win battles, but they could not extinguish the spirit of resistance. The year of chaos, 69 CE. The year 69 CE was a disaster for Rome, known as the Year of the Four Emperors. It saw civil war tear the empire apart. In such moments, distant provinces like Britain were vulnerable. In the north, the Brigantes seized the opportunity. Venutius launched yet another uprising, striking Roman garrisons and forts. With Rome distracted by internal conflict, the Ninth and other legions in Britain were left to hold the line with minimal reinforcements. For the soldiers, it must have felt like abandonment. Rome's political chaos seemed far away, yet its consequences were immediate. Fewer supplies, fewer replacements, and more pressure on those already stretched thin. That the Ninth survived this period at all is testimony to their discipline and resilience, yet it was also another scar on their reputation. Reports of Roman losses and difficulties in the north filtered back to the capital, reinforcing the idea that Britannia was a graveyard for legions. The rise of Quintus Petilius, the aftermath of Rome's civil wars. A new governor was appointed to Britain, Quintus Petilius, the very same man who had once led the Ninth to disaster against Boudica. Now, however, he returned with greater authority, tasked with finally bringing the Brigantes to heel. His campaigns in the early 70s CE were relentless. With multiple legions under his command, he launched coordinated offensives against Brigantian strongholds. The Ninth fought under him, pushing deeper into the north, crushing resistance, and fortifying new territory. Villages were destroyed, hill forts captured, rebels hunted down. Cerilis's campaigns were brutal but effective, slowly forcing the Brigantes into submission. By the mid-70s CE, Rome's grip on northern England was stronger than ever, and the Ninth was firmly entrenched at Eboracum. A legion's reputation by now. The Ninth Legion's reputation was complex. To Rome, they were survivors rebuilt after Boudica, hardened by years on the frontier, and instrumental in holding northern Britain. But they were also shadowed by failure. Their disaster under Boudica was not forgotten, and their difficulties with the Brigantes reinforced the perception that the Princeps Ninth struggled where other legions triumphed. For the Brigantes and other Britons, The Ninth was the face of Rome's oppression. They were the legion that burned villages, enslaved captives, and enforced imperial rule. Their eagle was a symbol not of glory, but of tyranny, foreshadowing the Ninth's fate by the close of the 1st century. The Ninth Legion was deeply bound to Britain. They had spent decades fighting its tribes, building its roads and forts, and living in its cold, wet climate. Yet the frontier was far from secure. Beyond the Brigantes lay the even more formidable tribes of Caledonia, modern Scotland, and Rome's ambitions did not end at Yorkshire. They sought to conquer the entire island. For the Ninth, this meant they were not finished with hardship. They had survived Boudica, endured the Brigantes, and rebuilt their strength. But the greatest test of all lay ahead, one that might explain their final disappearance from history. Conclusion of Chapter 4. The wars with the Brigantes were not just battles, they were a slow, grinding conflict that shaped the Ninth Legion's destiny in Britain. For years, they marched, fought, bled, and built in a land that refused to be tamed. The Brigantes represented the relentless resistance of Britain, a reminder that Rome's legions, for all their discipline and power, could never fully erase the spirit of a people. As the Ninth held the northern frontier, they stood at the edge of the empire, between civilization and wilderness, between glory and oblivion. And it was from this precarious position that they would march north into Caledonia, the campaigns that might have sealed their fate forever. Chapter 5. Into Caledonia. The push beyond the frontier. The Brigantes had been crushed, their hill forts broken, their lands scarred by Rome's advance. For the Ninth Legion Hispana, this long war in northern England had forged them into hardened frontier soldiers. But their struggles were not over. Rome's ambitions in Britain did not end with Yorkshire. Beyond the rolling hills and rugged moors lay the untamed lands of Caledonia, place of mountains, dense forests, and fierce tribes, who refused to bow to any conqueror. It was here, in the mist-shrouded north of Britain, that the Ninth would march once more. And it was here, in this hostile wilderness, that the seeds of their mysterious disappearance may have been sown. The vision of conquest in the late 1st century CE. Rome's governors were not content with partial domination. They dreamed of conquering the entire island of Britain, bringing every tribe under imperial control. To them, Britannia was more than a province. It was a symbol. The empire stretched from the sands of Africa to the forests of Germania, from the deserts of Syria to the shores of the Atlantic. To leave part of Britain unconquered felt like an admission of weakness. The tribes of Caledonia, what we now call Scotland, were the last obstacle. Fierce, independent, and skilled in guerrilla warfare, they posed a threat to Roman order. To subdue them would mean securing the empire's northwestern frontier once and for all. For the Ninth Legion, based at Eberach, modern York, this vision meant another campaign, one even harsher than the wars against the Brigantes. The Caledonians, warriors of the north, the peoples of Caledonia, were not like the southern tribes Rome had faced. They lived in small, scattered communities, often in hill forts perched on rugged heights. Their society was tribal, their loyalty to local chieftains rather than central rulers. But what they lacked in unity, they made up for in ferocity. They were hardened by the land itself, wild moors, bitter winds, and mountains that bred resilience. Their warriors fought with long spears, oval shields, and swords. Some accounts suggest they painted themselves with dyes, making them terrifying apparitions on the battlefield. Most of all, they were masters of guerrilla tactics. Unlike the massed formations Rome preferred, the Caledonians struck from ambush, harassed supply lines, and vanished into forests and hills. 4 legions trained to fight set-piece battles. This was a nightmare. To conquer Caledonia was not simply a matter of superior numbers or discipline. It was a test of endurance against an enemy who knew the land intimately. Marching north in the early 80s CE, the governor Gnaeus Julius Agricola was appointed to Britain, a seasoned commander, Agricola envisioned the complete conquest of the island. He reorganized supply lines, established new forts, and began a systematic push northward. The Ninth Legion was a key part of this advance. They marched along newly built Roman roads, cutting through forests and swamps, crossing rivers with hastily constructed bridges, and hauling their siege equipment into territory no Roman had controlled before. At every stage, they built forts, small wooden outposts at first, then more permanent stone structures. These served as footholds, securing supply lines and projecting Roman power into hostile territory. But every mile northward stretched Rome's resources thinner. The further they marched, the more vulnerable they became to raids, ambushes, and supply shortages. The Ninth knew that each fort was not just a symbol of conquest, but also a potential trap, isolated, surrounded by enemies, and dependent on fragile lifelines to the south. The first clashes, the Caledonians did not wait for Rome to surround them. They struck swiftly at Roman patrols, supply convoys, and isolated forts. Legionaries of the Ninth endured sleepless nights in their camps, listening to distant war horns echo across the hills. They marched through forests where every tree might conceal an ambush. Spears and arrows rained down from unseen heights. Warriors surged out of the mist to strike, then melted away before the legions could retaliate. Rome's answer was brutal. When they caught Caledonian bands, they slaughtered them mercilessly. Villages suspected of harboring resistance were burned. Crops were destroyed. Prisoners were enslaved. Agricola knew that only terror could break the tribes, but the Caledonians were not easily broken. Unlike the southern Britons, they had little to lose. Their lands were wild, their settlements small, their people accustomed to hardship. Rome's punishments, instead of pacifying them, only deepened their resolve. The march to Mons Graupiacen, 83 CE, Agricola launched his most ambitious campaign yet. Gathering multiple legions including the Ninth, he marched deep into Caledonia to face the tribes in open battle. The Caledonians, realizing Rome intended to crush them completely, united under a leader named Calgacus. Tacitus, Agricola's son-in-law and biographer, later recorded Calgacus's fiery speech to his warriors. They make a desert and call it peace. This was not merely a battle for land, it was a battle for freedom itself. The chosen battlefield was Mons Graupius, a site still debated by historians, but believed to be in northeastern Scotland. Here, perhaps for the first time, the Caledonians assembled a massive force to meet Rome head-on. For the Ninth, it was the culmination of years of hardship. They had fought in ambushes and skirmishes. Now they would face their enemy in a clash, worthy of their training and discipline. The Battle of Mons Graupius battle was fierce. Tacitus claimed that some 30,000 Caledonian warriors faced around 20,000 Romans and auxiliaries. The Caledonians launched ferocious charges, hurling spears, clashing shields, and screaming war cries. The Ninth and other legions held firm, their discipline creating a wall of shields and spears. Auxiliary cavalry and light infantry flanked the tribal warriors, while Roman cavalry cut through their ranks. The clash lasted for hours. Dust and mist clouded the field. The cries of the dying filled the air. For the legionaries, it was a battle of endurance, their training and discipline pitted against the sheer fury of the tribes. In the end, Rome prevailed. Tacitus claims the Caledonians lost 10,000 men, while Rome lost only a few hundred. The tribes broke and fled into the hills, their unity shattered. Agricola had won his great victory. The Ninth, bloodied but victorious, had once again proven themselves a legion of survivors. Aftermath, victory without conquest. Yet, for all its scale, Mons Graupius did not bring the conquest of Caledonia. The land itself defeated Rome. Supplying legions so far north was nearly impossible. Winters were brutal, the terrain unforgiving, and the tribes, though beaten, were not destroyed. They retreated into the mountains, regrouping. and continued their resistance in smaller, more elusive bands. Agricola was soon recalled to Rome, and his successors lacked his ambition. Gradually, the legions including the Ninth pulled back from the far north, consolidating their hold on what would later become the line of Hadrian's Wall. For the soldiers of the Ninth, Mons Gropius must have felt like both triumph and futility. They had marched into the heart of Caledonia, fought one of the greatest battles in Roman Britain, and emerged victorious yet. The land remained unconquered, the tribes undefeated in spirit. The toll on the 9th decades of constant warfare had taken their toll. The 9th Legion had been in Britain for nearly 40 years. They had endured disaster under Boudica, fought endless wars against the Brigantes, and marched deep into Caledonia. Their numbers had been replenished with recruits from across the empire: Spain, Gaul, Germania, even locals from Britain itself, but the scars of attrition were deep. Veterans who had arrived in Britain as young men now grew old within its cold, damp climate. Many never saw their homelands again. Others settled in the province, marrying locals, blending Roman and native traditions. But the legion itself carried a shadow. Though it had survived, its reputation was never one of glory, like the elite Legio Ten Gemina or the celebrated Legio to Augusta. Instead, the Ninth was seen as the Legion of Britain, isolated, embattled, surviving on the edge of empire. Foreshadowing the mystery, the march into Caledonia was both a triumph and a warning. It showed the resilience of the Ninth, their ability to endure where others might have faltered, but it also highlighted the precariousness of their position. Britain was not a settled province like Gaul or Hispania. It was unstable, rebellious, and costly. Legions here faced dangers not only from external enemies but also from the sheer strain of maintaining control. The Ninth had marched further into the wilderness than any Roman legion before them. They had glimpsed the limits of Rome's power, and perhaps, in doing so, they had also glimpsed their own fate. Conclusion of Chapter 5. The Ninth Legion's march into Caledonia was one of the boldest episodes in their history. They faced a land of mountains, forests, and fierce warriors. They endured ambushes, supply shortages, and the constant threat of annihilation. At Mons Gropius they fought one of the great battles of Roman Britain and emerged victorious, and yet, victory did not mean conquest. Caledonia remained untamed, unconquered, and beyond Rome's grasp. The Ninth returned to their bases in the north, bloodied survivors of another impossible campaign. But as the years passed, whispers grew. Had Mons Gropius truly secured Rome's control, or had it simply delayed the inevitable? For the Ninth Legion, the answer lay ahead. Their story was far from over. Their disappearance, still shrouded in mystery, was drawing closer with every march. Chapter 6. Shadows over Eboracum. The Legion settles in York. The clash at Mons Gropius had left the Ninth Legion bloodied, but undefeated. They had marched into the wild heart of Caledonia, fought ferocious tribes, and returned alive. For most legions of Rome, this would have been the pinnacle of glory. For the Ninth, however, it was merely another chapter in a long and wearying war. Their prize was not honor in Rome's grand forums, nor a triumphal parade. Their reward was to be stationed once again at the edge of the world in a fortress of stone and timber on the banks of the river Ouse, in a city the Romans called Eboracum. Here, in the windswept north of Britain, the Ninth would spend years building, fortifying, and defending Rome's frontier. But beneath the surface of discipline and order, shadows were gathering. Tensions simmered between soldiers and locals, between Rome and the tribes beyond the walls. And even within the legion itself, Eboracum would be both a home and a prison. And perhaps it would also be the stage upon which the Ninth's fate was sealed. The fortress of Eboracum I, the Ninth, arrived in Eboracum around 71 CE. The settlement was little more than a strategic crossing on the river Ouse, but Rome transformed it into one of the greatest military strongholds in Britain. The fortress covered 50 acres, built in the classic Roman playing card shape, rectangular, with rounded corners and gates at each cardinal direction. Its walls were first timber, later rebuilt in stone, and towers stood at intervals, watching over the surrounding countryside. Inside, the fortress was a miniature city, complete with barracks, workshops, granaries, and the Principia headquarters. At the center stood the Praetorium, the commander's residence. Streets were laid out in precise grid patterns. Drains and aqueducts ensured sanitation. To the Roman mind, order had been imposed upon chaos. Beyond the fortress walls grew a civilian settlement, vicus, traders, craftsmen, and families of soldiers. Set up homes, taverns, and bathhouses thrived. Soon, Eboracum was not just a military camp, it was a bustling city, one that would eventually rival Londinium London in importance. The Ninth Legion, however, remained its heart. The fortress was theirs, the city theirs to protect, and in many ways, theirs to shape. Life of a legionary, for the legionaries of the Ninth. Life in Eboracum was both monotonous and demanding. Each soldier's day was strictly regulated. They rose at dawn, stood inspection, and were assigned tasks. When not on campaign, legionaries were builders as much as fighters. They constructed roads, repaired walls, and maintained fortifications. Some were sent to nearby quarries to cut stone, others to forges to produce weapons. Training was constant. Soldiers drilled with wooden swords heavier than real ones, marched for miles with full packs, and practiced forming defensive squares and testudos shield walls. Discipline was harsh. A soldier who disobeyed could be flogged. A deserter could be executed. And yet, there were moments of reprieve. Taverns offered cheap ale. Bathhouses provided warmth and relaxation. Some soldiers formed relationships with local women, even though marriage was technically forbidden for serving legionaries. Children were born, unofficial families grew, and the line between Roman and Britain began to blur. But beneath this daily rhythm, tensions festered. The Ninth were foreign occupiers in a land that had not asked for their presence. Many Britons resented them. A city of two worlds, Eboracum, quickly became a city of contrasts. Inside the fortress, Roman order reigned. Streets were straight, buildings solid, the army disciplined. Latin echoed through the barracks. Standards and eagles reminded the soldiers of the empire they served. Outside the walls, the vicus grew chaotically. Traders from Gaul, Germania, and even further afield mingled with native Britons. Markets bustled with goods, pottery, jewelry, grain, and salted fish. The sounds of multiple languages filled the air, but this was also a place of vice. Taverns catered to drunken legionaries. Gambling dens lured men with dice and coin. Brothels thrived, despite official disapproval. For many soldiers, the vicus was where they escaped the rigidity of military life. Yet it was also where resentment brewed. Local Britons, forced to live in the shadow of the fortress, often saw the legion as oppressors. Taxes were high, labor was demanded, and punishments for defiance were swift. A spark could ignite conflict at any moment. The weight of defeat, though Eboracum was a fortress of strength, the Ninth carried a burden of memory. The disaster under Butka, where much of the legion had been slaughtered, still haunted their reputation. Among other legions, whispers persisted that the Ninth were unlucky, cursed even. Veterans remembered comrades cut down in burning towns, commanders slain, standards lost. Though replenished with new recruits, the legion could not escape its past. Every scar, every scarred veteran, was a reminder, and in Britain, memory was long. Native tribes remembered the Ninth's brutality just as clearly as the Ninth remembered its defeats. The wars against the Brigantes and the march into Caledonia had left blood on both sides. For the legionaries stationed at Eboracum, peace was never truly peaceful. It was the silence before another storm, command, and leadership. Leadership in the Ninth during this period was crucial. The legion's legate appointed by the emperor was not just a commander, but also a political figure. His choices shaped both the legion's morale and its relations with the province. Some commanders were respected, enforcing discipline with fairness. Others were corrupt or brutal, taking bribes from locals or punishing soldiers excessively. Under poor leadership, morale could collapse, desertions rise, and loyalty falter. The centurions, the backbone of the legion, were feared and respected in equal measure. Hardened by years of service, they kept order through both mentorship and violence. A legionary might hate his centurion, but he would follow him into battle. But what happens when commanders failed? When poor decisions left the legion isolated, exposed, or despised? History shows that the Ninth's fate may have been tied to exactly such failures. Eboracum and the frontiers. Strategically, Eboracum was vital. From here, the Ninth guarded the north against tribes still hostile to Rome. Their patrols stretched into the Pennines. Their forts dotted the countryside. Their presence loomed over every village. But the frontier was fragile, beyond Roman-controlled. Lands lay hostile territories, especially to the north. Raids were frequent. Watchtowers lit beacons to warn of attacks. Convoys were ambushed. Even within the province, uprisings smoldered. Discontented tribes could rise suddenly, drawing the legion into brutal suppression campaigns. Each time, the Ninth was stretched thin. Its men dispatched in small detachments to enforce Rome's will. Eboracum was not just a city. It was a pressure point, the very hinge of Rome's control in northern Britain. If the Ninth faltered here, the entire frontier could collapse. Whispers of dissent by the late 1st century CE. Unease was spreading. Rome had pulled back from deep Caledonia, abandoning forts that had cost lives to build. Too many soldiers, Mons Gropius now felt pointless, a victory wasted. Among the tribes, this retreat was a sign of weakness. Rome could be beaten, or at least resisted. The frontier grew restless. Within the Ninth itself, cracks showed. Some soldiers questioned the endless wars in a cold, distant land. Others dreamed of discharge, of farms in warmer provinces. Discipline grew harder to enforce. Desertion, though punishable by death, was a temptation. The Ninth still stood proud, but the shadows of doubt lengthened, foreshadowing the vanishing Eboracum. For all its strength, was not impregnable. Its walls could be breached, its soldiers ambushed, its supply lines cut. The very isolation of Britain made reinforcements slow. The disappearance of the Ninth, still centuries debated, may have begun in this period, not with a single dramatic battle, but with years of attrition, resentment, and vulnerability. Was it here, in the fortress of Eboracum, that their fate was sealed? Did tensions with locals lay the groundwork for a catastrophic revolt? Did Rome's neglect doom them to stand alone? Against overwhelming odds, the shadows over Eboracum grew darker with each passing year. And though the Ninth did not yet know it, their story was moving steadily toward its most mysterious and tragic chapter. Conclusion of Chapter 6. At Eboracum, the Ninth Legion carved a fortress from the wilds of northern Britain. They built, trained, and policed the frontier, creating one of the great Roman cities of the province. Yet beneath the surface, unease simmered. The legion carried scars of past defeats, the resentment of conquered peoples, and the strain of endless duty. Though Eboracum stood tall, it was also fragile, an outpost of Rome surrounded by hostility. The Ninth's presence here was both its strength and its vulnerability, and as the years wore on, the fortress would become less a place of safety and more a cage from which there was no escape. The shadows had only begun to gather. Chapter 7. The Gathering Storm. Rebellions and raids on the northern frontier. The fortress of Eboracum stood like a great stone sentinel on the northern edge of Roman Britain. To its walls, the Ninth Legion returned each night, weary from patrols, watchful for smoke rising from distant villages, listening for the sound of horns blown in alarm along the frontier. Rome called this peace, but the men of the Ninth knew better. Peace in Britain was fragile, brittle as glass. The tribes had bent under Rome's weight, but they had not broken, and every step north of the fortress walls led into a land simmering with rebellion. By the close of the 1st century CE, the Ninth found itself locked in a slow-burning, conflicting, undeclared war of raids, reprisals, and insurgencies that eroded their numbers, their morale, and perhaps, in time, their very existence. The landscape of the frontier, the northern frontier, of Roman Britain was unlike any other in the empire. In Gaul, fertile fields stretched between rivers and roads. In Hispania, Rome controlled rich mines and sprawling cities. But in Britain's north, Rome found itself in a wild, untamed land of forests, bogs, and rugged hills. The Pennines cut through the center of the island like a spine, their valleys, deep and often shrouded in mist. To the north lay the vast highlands of Caledonia, dense woods, barren moors, and mountains so forbidding that even Rome's best engineers struggled to march through them. The weather was relentless, freezing, rains, biting winds, and winters that seemed to stretch endlessly. It was into this hostile terrain that the Ninth marched daily. Their patrols moved through forests where every tree could conceal an enemy archer, across moors where the fog rolled thick, reducing vision to a few paces. Ambush was constant. Fear was constant. The landscape itself was a weapon, one that favored the tribes, the Britons of the north. The people Rome faced here were not united under one banner. They were a patchwork of tribes: Brigantes, Votadini, Selgovi, Novanta, and Caledoni, fiercely independent and bound to their lands. Of these, the Brigantes were the most important, controlling vast swaths of northern England. They were both ally and enemy, depending on Rome's grip on their leaders. The Queen Cartimandua had once cooperated with Rome, famously handing over the rebel leader Caratacus, but her rival Venutius stirred rebellion against Roman rule. The Ninth found itself caught in these tribal conflicts, enforcing Rome's will one year, fighting a full-scale uprising the next. Unlike Rome's legions, the tribes fought with guerrilla tactics. They struck supply lines, ambushed small detachments, burned watchtowers, and disappeared into forests before the Romans could retaliate. When Rome retaliated, it was often with overwhelming force, razing villages, slaughtering livestock, and enslaving survivors. Each side fed the other's hatred, the toll of endless raids day after day. The Ninth was dispatched into the countryside. Sometimes it was to escort grain convoys from southern Britain to feed the garrison, sometimes to chase raiders who had attacked a Roman farm, sometimes to rebuild a watchtower that had mysteriously burned in the night. It was thankless work. Rarely did it bring glory. Often it brought death. Imagine a column of 50 legions marching along a forest path. The air is damp, the fog heavy. Without warning, a hail of javelins arcs from the tree line. Men scream, shields shatter. Before the Ninth can form ranks, painted warriors charge from the woods, shrieking in battle frenzy. By the time the Romans rally, half the patrol is dead. The survivors limp back to Abruzzium with wounds and tales of terror. For every raid Rome crushed, another erupted elsewhere. The Ninth was slowly bled, not in great, decisive battles, but in endless skirmishes, the kind of war no legion was built to endure forever. The siege of a watchtower, one story survives in fragments, whispered in later chronicles. Of a watchtower north of Eboracum, a small garrison of the Ninth had been stationed there, perhaps 30 men. Their orders: to keep watch over the road leading into Caledonia. At dusk, smoke was seen on the horizon. By nightfall, hundreds of tribal warriors surrounded the tower. Flaming arrows set its timber walls ablaze. The legionaries fought desperately, hurling spears down from the ramparts, trying to douse the flames. For 2 days they held out. On the third, silence fell. When a relief force finally arrived, the tower was ash. Inside, charred remains of the garrison lay scattered, their armor stripped, their eagle standard missing. To the tribes, it was a victory song. To the Ninth, a wound to their pride that never healed. The burden of rebellions were nothing new to Rome. From Gaul to Judea, provinces rose against imperial rule. But Britain's revolts were uniquely persistent. The Brigantian rebellions of the late 1st century forced Rome to commit legions for years on end. When Venutius rallied his people against Cartamandua's pro-Roman faction, the Ninth was dragged into the conflict. Villages had to be pacified, strongholds besieged. The Romans prevailed, but only at terrible cost. Men were lost, supplies stretched thin, morale battered, and each new rebellion reminded the tribes that Rome could bleed. For the Ninth, the endless uprisings were not glorious campaigns, but grinding wars of attrition. Few soldiers earned promotions or triumphs in Rome for such dirty, brutal work. Most earned only scars, nightmares, and graves far from home. Inside the legion, strain and suspicion, the constant raiding took its toll. Inside the Ninth's fortress walls, discipline frayed. Desertions, though rare, became more frequent. Some soldiers slipped into the vicus and never returned, blending into local villages or fleeing south. Others grew violent, turning their frustrations on civilians. The relationship with the locals of Eboracum soured. Traders resented Roman taxes. Families of slain tribesmen despised the legion. Rumors spread of conspiracies, secret alliances. Between townsfolk and raiders, information about patrol routes whispered into the night. Paranoia crept into the legion. Who could be trusted? Could the man selling grain outside the fortress gate also be guiding raiders to supply lines? Could the woman warming a legionary's bed also be feeding intelligence to rebels? The Ninth became watchful, suspicious. Their sense of isolation deepening. Rome's indifference, perhaps the greatest enemy of the Ninth, was not the tribes, but Rome itself. By the time these troubles gripped northern Britain, the empire's gaze had shifted elsewhere. Emperors changed rapidly in Rome. Political turmoil distracted the Senate, and distant wars in Dacia and Parthia consumed resources. For the Ninth, this meant one thing: they were largely forgotten. Reinforcements were slow, supplies delayed, requests for aid ignored. The sense of abandonment grew. They were an army stranded at the edge of the known world, holding back enemies with dwindling numbers, while Rome looked elsewhere. And as soldiers whispered in the barracks, what if one day Rome simply decided Britain wasn't worth the cost? What if no help came at all? The storm breaks. By the early 2nd century CE, tensions reached a breaking point. Rebellions erupted once again in the north. Raiders struck deeper into Roman lands. Convoys were destroyed, forts overrun. The Ninth was stretched thin, forced to divide its strength into small detachments vulnerable to ambush. At Eboracum, commanders tightened discipline. Punishments grew harsher. Executions for desertion or cowardice became public spectacles. But such measures only deepened resentment. The Ninth was not yet broken, but cracks spread across its foundation, foreshadowing a catastrophe. Historians debate what happened next. Did the Ninth suffer a catastrophic defeat during these northern uprisings? Were they ambushed and annihilated on some misty battlefield, their eagle standard captured, their name erased in shame? Or did they survive these years, only to meet their doom later, either in Britain or in far-off wars of the East? The truth may never be known, but it is clear that the gathering storm of rebellions and raids weakened the legion, drained its strength, and sowed the seeds of its disappearance. What began as endless skirmishes may have led to a final, decisive blow. Conclusion of Chapter 7. In the shadow of Eboracum, the Ninth Legion faced not grand battles, but the grinding war of attrition that slowly bled it dry. The landscape conspired against them. The tribes resisted with fury. and Rome abandoned them to their fate. The rebellions of the north were more than temporary uprisings, they were the storm clouds gathering over the legion's future. Each raid, each ambush, each betrayal pushed the Ninth closer to the edge of annihilation. The storm was breaking, and when it did, it would sweep the Ninth into history's greatest mystery. Chapter 8. Blood in the Mist. The theories of the Ninth's final battle. The Ninth Legion's story did not end with triumph. It ended with silence. One day, they were the guardians of northern Britain, garrisoned at Eburotion, patrolling roads, enforcing Rome's rule, and then vanished. No records of a glorious campaign. No inscriptions celebrating their victories. Only gaps in history, like footprints erased by the tide. For centuries, scholars, soldiers, and storytellers have asked the same haunting question. What really happened to the Ninth Legion? Theories abound. Some claim they were annihilated in a single disastrous battle in the mists of Caledonia. Others argue they were transferred elsewhere in the empire, only to be destroyed in wars far from Britain. But perhaps the most compelling possibility is that the Ninth met its end here, in Britain, swallowed by rebellion, its blood soaking into the soil of the mist-shrouded north. This chapter explores that theory, the vision of the Ninth's final stand in Britain, where the Legion marched into the mist and never returned. The disappearance in the records. The first clue lies in silence. Roman records were often meticulous. They named legions, their commanders, their triumphs, their movements across the empire. But when it comes to the Ninth, the trail grows cold. In the early 2nd century, we know the Legion was in Britain during the governorship of Sextus Julius Frontinus and Agricola, stationed at Eburotion. We know it fought rebellions, guarded the frontier, rebuilt roads and forts. But then, sometime after 108 CE, the inscriptions vanished. No stone records the Ninth being transferred out of Britain. No commander proudly mentions leading it in later campaigns. By the reign of Emperor Hadrian, the Ninth's name is conspicuously absent. To the Romans, silence often meant disgrace. Defeat so total, so humiliating, that it was better to erase the memory than preserve it. The seeds of catastrophe. The northern tribes had long harried Rome's frontier. The Brigantes, the Caledoni, and countless smaller clans despised Roman occupation. Guerrilla warfare was their strength. Fast-moving raids, sudden ambushes, vanishing into woods and hills. But rebellions were never just local. They were contagious. When one tribe rose, others followed. Smoke from one burning village became a beacon for another to take up arms. For years, the Ninth fought these uprisings with grim efficiency. But over time, the legions grew thin. Reinforcements were scarce. Supplies often delayed, and the tribes learned. They studied Roman tactics, probed their weaknesses, and waited. According to some theories, the tribes eventually united in a rare alliance, gathering their strength for a decisive strike. Their target, the Ninth Legion. The march into the mist. Imagine the scene. A messenger arrives at Eburotion. A Roman outpost on the frontier has been attacked, its garrison slaughtered. Smoke rises from the hills. The Ninth's commander cannot ignore it. To do so would be weakness, an invitation for greater rebellion. He gathers his legion, perhaps 5,000 men, and marches north, through valleys, across moors, into the forests of the Brigantes, and beyond. Locals whisper warnings. Traders vanish. The air grows heavy. The weather turns foul. Fog blankets the land. Visibility shrinks. The Legion's famed discipline begins to fray. Columns stretch too long across difficult ground. Scouts vanish in the mist. The soldiers march on, unaware they are walking into a trap. The ambush, when the attack comes, it is sudden and merciless. The hills erupt with war cries. Horns blare through the fog. Stones and spears rain down from hidden ridges. Painted warriors surge from the trees, slamming into Roman lines before they can properly form. The Ninth tries to rally. Shields lock, swords flash, but the mist disorients them. Cohorts become separated, unable to see each other, unable to hear commands. Trumpets sound, but the echoes twist in the fog, confusing friend and foe. The tribes know this land. They strike from every side, vanishing into the mist, reappearing behind Roman ranks. Fires blaze, igniting supply wagons. Horses panic. Chaos spreads. A legion built for open battle finds itself trapped in a nightmare of confusion and terror. The final stand-in. The heart of the storm. Small groups of legionaries fight desperately. They form tight circles, shields raised, fighting off waves of attackers. But exhaustion grows, wounds mount. For every warrior cut down, 2 more take his place. The standard-bearers guard the legion's eagle, the sacred symbol of their honor. They fight with ferocity, unwilling to let it fall. Yet, in the end, even the eagle disappears into the mist. Perhaps some survivors break free, fleeing south. Perhaps a handful crawl back to Eberacum, bloodied and half-mad, with tales too shameful to record. But the legion as a unit is gone, swallowed, erased. All that remains is silence. Archaeological shadows. Archaeologists have long searched for evidence of such a battle. Some point to mass graves found in northern England and southern Scotland, scattered, weapons broken, signs of sudden violence. Others argue these belong to later conflicts. The absence of clear evidence is itself haunting. If the Ninth was annihilated here, the tribes may have burned the bodies, left them to rot, or cast them into bogs where time consumed them. The silence of the earth mirrors the silence of Roman records. Both conceal the truth. Rome's reaction if the Ninth was destroyed in Britain. Why is there no grand record of it? The answer may be shame. Rome could tolerate defeat but not humiliation. A lost battle could be avenged. A lost legion was an open wound, a symbol of imperial weakness. The erasure of the Ninth from history may have been deliberate. Better to pretend they were redeployed, scattered quietly, than admit they were annihilated by barbarians in a distant, fog-shrouded province. But Rome's actions after their disappearance are telling. Soon after, Emperor Hadrian ordered the construction of a massive fortification thole that still bears his name. A wall to mark the edge of empire. A wall to keep the northern tribes at bay. Was Hadrian's wall built because of the Ninth's fate? Many believe so. The legends that followed stories of the Ninth's last stand spread across centuries. Medieval chroniclers spoke of a Roman army swallowed by mist, their cries echoing through the hills at night. Local folklore told of ghostly soldiers marching through the fog, their armor glinting faintly before fading into nothing. Even today, in the north of England, walkers on lonely moors claim to hear phantom horns, the clash of steel, the tramp of unseen feet. The Ninth became more than a legion. They became a legend. Alternate possibilities, of course. Not all scholars agree. Some argue the Ninth was transferred to the continent, perhaps to the Rhine or the East, where they later perished in distant wars. Inscriptions found in the Netherlands and the Danube mention legion detachments that may have belonged to the Ninth. But even these theories cannot erase the haunting possibility that their story ended in Britain, that the mists of the North swallowed them whole. Conclusion of Chapter 8. The vision of the Ninth's final battle is one of the most haunting mysteries of Roman history. A legion marching proudly into the north. A sudden storm of rebellion. A desperate fight in the fog. Silence. Whether or not it truly happened this way, the image endures. The Ninth Legion's banners falling in the mist. Their eagle lost. Their blood mingling with the soil of Britain. And, perhaps, in the end, the truth does not matter. What matters is the legend, the haunting reminder that even Rome, master of the world, could vanish into silence on the edge of empire. Chapter 9. Rome responds. The shadow of the lost legion. The disappearance of the Ninth Legion did not pass unnoticed. For Rome, even whispers of a lost legion were dangerous. Empires are built on strength, on the illusion of invincibility. If one legion could vanish, others might follow. If one frontier crumbled, others might burn. This chapter explores how Rome reacted to the loss, whether through denial, silence, or drastic measures, how the disappearance of the Ninth cast a long shadow over the empire's strategy in Britain and beyond. The first reports in the early years of the 2nd century, news began to filter south. Rumors spread from traders, scouts, and scattered survivors. Something had happened in the north. A Roman force had been ambushed. Thousands of soldiers had disappeared at Eboracum. Officials faced a dilemma. To report disaster too quickly was to invite panic. To delay was to risk greater chaos if the truth emerged later. So the first reports were muted. A skirmish, a setback, losses in the frontier zone. Nothing that required alarm. Yet those who had seen the aftermath of burned forts, the empty roads, the silence where once a legion had stood knew the truth was far worse. The politics of silence in Rome, the emperor's court, thrived on information. Victories were trumpeted in marble and bronze. Defeats were buried under layers of silence. When whispers of the Ninth's fate reached the capital, they arrived, stripped of detail. Some claimed the legion had been redeployed. Others suggested it had been merged with another unit. Official records made no mention of disaster. This silence was deliberate. To acknowledge the destruction of an entire legion by tribes considered barbarians would have been a humiliation. It would embolden enemies, weaken allies, and spark unrest across the empire. Better, Rome decided to rewrite the story. The arrival of Hadrian in 122 CE. Emperor Hadrian visited Britain. His arrival was no coincidence. The northern frontier was unstable, and the empire needed a show of strength. Hadrian was a pragmatic ruler, less concerned with conquest than with consolidation. He recognized that Rome's resources were finite. Endless wars drained the treasury. Endless expansion stretched the legions too thin. If the Ninth had indeed been destroyed, Hadrian's solution was not to pour more soldiers into the same trap. Instead, he chose to define Rome's limits. Hadrian's Wall. The construction of Hadrian's Wall was both practical and symbolic. Stretching roughly 80 Roman miles across northern Britain, it marked the empire's boundary. Behind the wall lay Rome's order and civilization. Beyond it lay chaos, mist, and danger. For some, the wall was an admission of defeat. Rome had failed to conquer the north, so it built a barrier instead. For others, it was a brilliant act of strategy, a way to secure the frontier, control movement, and project strength. Yet beneath its stones, one can still feel the ghost of the Ninth. The wall may not have been built solely because of their fate, but their disappearance hung over its foundations like a shadow. Military reorganization. Hadrian's arrival also brought reinforcements. New legions were stationed in Britain. Auxiliary units from across the empire bolstered the frontier. Forts were rebuilt. Supply lines strengthened. Roads improved. The message was clear. Rome would not be caught unprepared again. But the Ninth itself was never reformed. No successor legion carried its name. It was as though the Ninth had been erased, their shame too great to remember, their loss too great to acknowledge. The effect on the tribes. For the northern tribes, the destruction of the Ninth was a victory beyond measure. Word of their triumph spread like wildfire. Songs were sung of the painted warriors who broke Rome's might. Yet victory carried risks. Rome was wounded, not slain, and the empire's revenge, when it came, would be relentless. The tribes knew they could not destroy Rome entirely, but they had proved something vital. Rome could bleed. The psychological impact. The Ninth's disappearance did not only affect military strategy, it shook the psychology of empire. Soldiers whispered of the legion that marched into the mist and never returned. Commanders grew wary of overextending their forces. Governors weighed the risk of provoking uprisings. In taverns and marketplaces, the story spread in hushed tones. Some said the Ninth still marched at night, ghostly figures seen along the northern roads. Others claimed the gods themselves had swallowed the Legion as punishment for Rome's arrogance. The Ninth had become more than a military loss. They had become a legend of fear. Alternative narratives. Not everyone agreed. The Ninth perished in Britain. Some Roman officials promoted the idea that the Legion had been redeployed to the Rhine, the Danube, or even the eastern provinces. This narrative served two purposes. It deflected blame from Britain's governors, and it reassured the empire that no disaster had occurred. Indeed, inscriptions in the Netherlands and along the Danube mentioned detachments of the Ninth. But were these remnants of a broken legion? Scattered survivors reassigned elsewhere, or evidence the entire legion had been moved? The truth remains uncertain. The silence of inscriptions, one of the most telling pieces of evidence, is what is not found. Roman legions left behind inscriptions everywhere. They served dedications, construction records, tombstones. Yet after the early 2nd century, no such inscriptions mention the Ninth as a complete legion. This absence suggests more than redeployment. It suggests obliteration. The broader consequences for Rome, the Ninth's disappearance, foreshadowed a larger truth. Rome's reach had limits. The empire could build walls, raise armies, enforce order, but it could not conquer every land, nor silence every enemy. Britain's misty hills and defiant tribes revealed the fragility beneath Rome's power. In the centuries to come, other legions would fall, other frontiers would crumble. The Ninth was not the first Roman unit to be destroyed, but it became one of the most infamous, a legion erased by the mid-2nd century. The Ninth was gone, not only in fact, but in memory. Official rolls omitted it. Histories skipped over its fate to Rome. It was as though the Ninth had never existed. But silence is not forgetfulness. In the whispers of soldiers, in the fears of governors, in the songs of the tribes, the Ninth lived on. Conclusion of Chapter 9. Rome's response to the Ninth's disappearance was both denial and action. Denial, in the erasure of their name, the rewriting of records, the silence of official histories. Action, in the arrival of Hadrian, the reorganization of Britain's defenses, the construction of the Great Wall that still endures. The Ninth may have been forgotten in marble, but they were remembered in stone, the stones of Hadrian's Wall, raised as both barrier and warning. Their shadow lingered not only in Britain, but across the empire, a reminder that even Rome, mistress of the world, was not invulnerable. Chapter 10. Hadrian's Wall and the memory of the Ninth. The Ninth Legion may have vanished into the misty highlands of northern Britain, but their absence carved scars deeper than any battlefield wound. By the time Emperor Hadrian arrived in 122 CE, Rome faced a difficult truth. The northern frontier could no longer be held through force of arms alone. Instead, Hadrian's solution was to build, not conquer. His wall became one of the most enduring symbols of Rome's presence in Britain, but beneath its stones lay whispers of the Ninth, their defeat, their erasure, and the lesson they had taught the empire about the limits of power. This chapter explores the creation of Hadrian's Wall, its purpose, and its symbolic link to the vanished Ninth Legion, the frontier before the wall for decades. Rome's northern frontier was fluid. Governors launched campaigns into Caledonia, built forts along key roads, and demanded tribute from tribal leaders. But Britain was unlike Gaul, unlike Spain, unlike the East. Its landscape was rugged, its weather harsh, its tribes stubbornly independent. The Ninth's disappearance showed Rome that direct control of the North was impossible without tremendous cost. Thus, by the early 2nd century, Rome faced a choice: abandon Britain beyond the lowlands or build a permanent boundary. Arrival Hadrian was no stranger to military matters. He had served with legions on the Danube and in the East. He understood both strategy and symbolism. When he arrived in Britain in 122 CE, He was greeted not with triumph, but with tension. The northern tribes were restless. The legions were stretched thin. Supply lines were vulnerable. Hadrian's vision was radical. Instead of advancing, he ordered the construction of a wall across the narrowest part of northern Britain from the River Tyne in the east to the Solway Firth in the west. This wall would not merely defend. It would define the wall as strategy at first glance. Hadrian's wall was a defensive fortification, a physical barrier of stone and turf, punctuated by forts, mile castles, and watchtowers. But its function was far more complex. Control of movement. The wall regulated trade, migration, and smuggling. Gates became checkpoints where Rome could tax, monitor, and restrict. Psychological domination. Two tribes of the north, the wall screamed Roman power. Its sheer size was intended to awe, to intimidate. Military advantage, with forts and garrisons spaced along its length. The wall allowed rapid response to raids and incursions. Political message to Rome. The wall was proof of Hadrian's pragmatism. The empire would consolidate, not endlessly expand. The shadow of the Ninth, though, never officially stated. Many historians believe the Ninth's fate influenced Hadrian's decision. The Ninth's destruction revealed how dangerous the North truly was. Even a full legion could vanish in its forests and bogs. To continue pressing northward risked more disasters. Hadrian's wall was thus a silent memorial to the Ninth, not in marble, not in inscriptions, but in the decision to halt expansion. The wall was Rome's acknowledgement that the cost of conquering Caledonia was too high. Building the wall construction began almost immediately. Legions stationed in Britain, including the 2nd, 6th, and 20th, were tasked with the immense labor. Stone walls rose where quarries allowed, while turf ramparts filled the western stretches. At regular intervals, mile castles housed small garrisons. Larger forts like Vindolanda and Housesteads became hubs of military life. The scale was staggering. 80 Roman miles, roughly 73 modern miles, with ditches, roads, and civilian settlements. It was one of the largest building projects in the Roman world. And yet, behind every stone lay the unspoken question: would the Ninth have been spared if the wall had existed earlier? Life along the wall was not merely a barrier. It was a living frontier. Soldiers patrolled, merchants traded, families settled, towns grew beside forts, where Britons and Romans mingled uneasily. Inscriptions show the presence of auxiliary units from across the empire: Syrians, Spaniards, Batavians. To them, the wall must have felt like the end of the world, a damp, windswept line at the edge of civilization. But to the tribes beyond, the wall was both obstacle and opportunity. Some raided across it, others traded through its gates. For them, Rome's presence was a fact of life, but not an unquestioned dominance. A barrier of stone and fear. Hadrian's wall was more than physical. It was psychological. To the Romans, it provided a sense of security. Within its line lay the empire, order, law, civilization. Beyond lay the wilderness, the unknown, the land of ghosts. To the Britons, the wall was an intrusion. Some tribes saw it as a challenge, proof that Rome feared them. Others viewed it as an opportunity for profit, controlling trade and tribute across its gates. For both, the wall became a symbol of division, a scar across the land, marking two worlds. The Ninth? In memory, though Rome officially erased the Ninth, the soldiers who built the wall would not have forgotten them. Around campfires, whispers of the lost legion lingered. They marched north and never returned, one might say. The gods swallowed them in the mist. Another would add, the Ninth became a cautionary tale, proof of what awaited those who underestimated the North. For the tribes, the story was different. To them, the Ninth was a triumph, a legend of resistance. Parents may have told their children, remember the warriors who broke the Romans. Thus, the Ninth lived on not in stone inscriptions, but in stories, fears, and pride. Vindolanda tablis. Among the most famous archaeological finds from Hadrian's Wall are the Vindolanda tablissim wooden writing tablets preserved in the damp soil. They record everyday life, letters home, supply lists, birthday invitations. In their lines we glimpse the human side of the frontier. Soldiers missing wine, wives missing friends, commanders ordering boots and cloaks for the cold. But amid these mundane details lies silence about the Ninth. By then, the Legion had already been erased. Their absence speaks louder than words. They were not stationed on the wall, nor anywhere else in Britain, Rome's public face in Rome itself. Hadrian's Wall was presented not as a retreat, but as a triumph of organization. Monuments declared Hadrian's wisdom. Coins depicted the emperor inspecting the frontier. The loss of the Ninth was never mentioned. Instead, the wall became the narrative. Rome's control, Rome's stability, Rome's strength. But beneath the propaganda, those who knew Britain understood the truth. The wall was not proof of Roman victory. It was proof of Roman limitation. The tribes beyond the wall did not end tribal resistance. Raids continued. Alliances shifted. Some tribes traded peace for profit, while others launched attacks. For these tribes, the memory of the Ninth was a rallying cry. If one legion could be destroyed, others could be harassed. If Rome could be wounded once, it could be wounded again. Thus, the Ninth's legacy lived not only in Rome's fear, but in the tribes. Courage. The wall, as legacy. Hadrian's Wall endured for centuries, even after Rome withdrew from Britain. The wall remained a monument of stone and determination. It shaped the landscape, the economy, the culture of northern Britain. Generations of soldiers and civilians lived in its shadow. But to those who built it, the wall must have been haunted. Haunted by the memory of a legion that vanished. Haunted by the realization that Rome, for all its power, had boundaries it could not cross. Conclusion of Chapter 10. Hadrian's Wall was Rome's answer to the Ninth. A wall of stone built over a wound of silence, a structure that defined the empire's edge, both physically and symbolically, for Rome. It was a statement, thus far, and no further. For the tribes, it was a challenge, a scar, a reminder of their strength. The Ninth Legion may have been erased from official memory, but they lived on in the wall itself. Every stone laid was testimony to the cost of their disappearance. Every mile of fortification was Rome's admission. The North had broken them once, and might again. The wall was not just a frontier, it was a memorial. Chapter 11. The myths and legends of the Ninth Legion. History is never written only in stone. It lives in memory, in whispers, in fireside tales passed from one generation to the next. For the Ninth Legion, whose official records were erased, their afterlife existed not in inscriptions or monuments but in myth. From the misty glens of Scotland to the bustling streets of Rome, stories about the Ninth flourished, each shaped by the teller, each adding layers to the mystery of their fate. Some tales painted them as victims of annihilation, others as wanderers cursed by the gods, and still others as phantoms who marched forever in the northern mists. In this chapter, we explore how the Ninth Legion transformed from soldiers of Rome into legends of Britain, and how myth blurred the line between fact and imagination. The silence of Rome. Before diving into folklore, it is essential to understand the silence that birthed it. Rome deliberately erased the Ninth's fate from its official records. No triumphs, no defeats, no inscriptions commemorating their last campaigns. Only absence, but silence invites speculation. Human beings hate a void. Where there is no explanation, stories rush in to fill the gap. Thus, in the decades and centuries after the Ninth's disappearance, countless versions of their end circulated across Britain and beyond. Whispers among soldiers among the Roman legions, stationed along Hadrian's Wall, and later the Antonine frontier. The Ninth was never truly forgotten. Veterans who had once served with them shared hushed accounts. They marched into the highlands and never returned. The gods punished them for their pride. They still walk the bogs, seen at night when the moon is thin. The story of the Ninth became a soldier's cautionary tale, warning about the dangers of underestimating Britain's tribes. It was also a lesson in humility. No legion, no matter how disciplined, was invincible. The tribal perspective, for the Britons and Caledonians, the Ninth's disappearance was not tragedy but triumph. To them, the story was retold with pride. Around fires in the north, elders may have told their children, "We broke the Romans once. Their mighty legion vanished into our hills. The land itself swallowed them, for the gods of Britain are stronger than Rome's." These tales gave resistance a heroic lineage. Whenever tribes later rebelled against Rome, they invoked a memory of the Ninth's defeat. The legion's erasure from Roman history only made them more vivid in native memory. The curse of the gods, one enduring legend suggested the Ninth was cursed. According to this tale, the legion defiled a sacred grove in northern Britain, down trees, burning offerings, or killing druids who lived there. In revenge, the gods of the land struck them down. Storms swept over their camp. Fog misled them into swamps. Ghostly warriors rose from the earth. By morning, the legion was gone, erased, not by human hands, but by divine wrath. Such a story served both Romans and Britons. To Romans, it was a warning not to offend the gods of foreign lands. To Britons, it was proof that their deities could destroy even Rome's mightiest. The Phantom March, perhaps the most haunting legend of the Ninth, is the Phantom March. For centuries, locals near York, along Hadrian's Wall, and deep into Scotland, spoke of spectral soldiers seen in the mist, columns of armored men, their helmets glinting faintly in moonlight. The echo of iron-shod boots, striking stone roads where no troops marched. The distant call of Roman horns, fading into silence. One story from Northumberland tells of farmers plowing fields near an abandoned Roman road. At dusk, they claimed, to hear footsteps, and looked up to see a ghostly legion moving north, silent but relentless. When approached, the soldiers vanished like smoke. Such tales persisted into medieval times, and even into the modern era, giving the Ninth a strange immortality. The betrayal mythena, the strand of folklore, claimed the Ninth was not destroyed in battle, but betrayed from within. According to this version, a Caledonian chieftain promised the legion safe passage through hostile lands. Trusting him, the Romans marched into a narrow glen. There, the tribes struck, and the chieftain turned on his allies. Every man of the Ninth perished. Some stories even suggest survivors were enslaved, their Roman identity erased as they were absorbed into local tribes. This tale appealed to a universal theme, the dangers of trusting the enemy. It also offered a romantic notion that perhaps the Ninth had not vanished entirely, but lived on forgotten Romans, turned into Britons. Christian, reimagining B, the 4th and 5th centuries. When Christianity spread through Britain, the story of the Ninth was reshaped again. Christian chroniclers framed their fate as punishment for pagan arrogance. The Ninth, in their eyes, symbolized the futility of resisting divine providence. In some versions, the legion became martyrs, not martyrs for Christ, but martyrs to the inevitable collapse of empire in the face of God's will. Their defeat foreshadowed Rome's eventual fall. Thus, the Ninth was woven into a Christian moral tale. Pride leads to destruction, and only faith endures. Medieval folklore in the Middle Ages, when Roman ruins dotted Britain, but their meaning was half forgotten. The Ninth's legend took on new lives in some stories. They were knights cursed for hubris, doomed to march until Judgment Day. In others, they were swallowed into the earth as punishment for their sins. Local legends around York told of underground chambers where Roman soldiers slept, waiting to rise again. Bards and storytellers merged Roman ghosts with Arthurian-style myths. The Ninth became a part of Britain's enchanted landscape, not history, but legend. Echoes in place names. Some scholars believe traces of the Ninth linger in local names and traditions. Certain valleys in Scotland bear nicknames linked to lost soldiers or red fields, hinting at bloody battles remembered in folk memory. Though we cannot confirm these connections, it is telling that landscapes themselves became haunted. By the Ninth, geography became memory, and memory became myth. The march into eternity, particularly poetic legend, imagines the Ninth never dying at all, but condemned to march forever. In this version, the gods of Britain cursed them with endless wandering. They march north by night, south by day, never finding rest. Their souls unable to reach the afterlife. The image of an eternal legion trapped in limbo, boots striking the earth in an endless rhythm, captured the imagination of later writers. It symbolized Rome's futility in conquering Britain. The empire itself, condemned to walk endlessly, but never truly win. Why legends endure. The persistence of these stories shows how the Ninth's disappearance touched something deeper than military history. For Romans, it was a tale of caution. No army is invincible. For Britons, it was a tale of triumph. Rome could be defeated. For Christians, it was a tale of divine justice. Pride comes before the fall. For later generations, it was a tale of mystery, a reminder that history always leaves gaps, and in those gaps, legends grow. Modern resonance. Even today, the Ninth continues to inspire. Novels like The Eagle of the Ninth, and films such as The Eagle and Centurion reinvent their fate. Historians debate their disappearance, while storytellers reimagine it. In ghost tours near York and along Hadrian's Wall, guides still tell visitors about spectral legions marching in the night. The Ninth has become less a historical unit and more a cultural icon. The legion that would not die. Conclusion of Chapter 11. The Ninth Legion began as flesh and blood, men with armor, swords, and families, but in their erasure, they became something more enduring. Their afterlife is not carved on Roman stone, but in the imagination of generations. They live in ghost stories, in tribal boasts, in medieval curses, in novels and films. Whether annihilated in battle, betrayed by allies, or swallowed by gods, the Ninth's greatest legacy may not be their disappearance, but the myths that followed. For, in those myths, they never vanish. They march still, shadows in the mist, reminding us that history is not only about what happened, but about what we believe might have happened. Chapter 12. Rome's erasure of the Ninth history is not only about what is remembered, it is also about what is forgotten, sometimes naturally, sometimes deliberately. The disappearance of the Roman Ninth Legion is as much about silence as it is about action. No stone inscriptions, no detailed records, no triumphant dedications or mournful epitaphs remain. It is as though an entire legion of nearly 5,000 men was swallowed whole, not just by the mists of Britain, but by the bureaucracy of Rome itself. This chapter examines how and why Rome may have chosen to erase the Ninth Legion from its historical record, and what that act of silence reveals about the empire's relationship with memory, shame, and power. Rome's obsession with memory. The Roman Empire was a civilization deeply concerned with memory and commemoration. Victories were celebrated with arches, inscriptions, and triumphal processions. Emperors carved their names into stone so they might endure for eternity. Even ordinary soldiers were honored with tombstones recording their service. But memory was never neutral. Rome preserved what it wanted to glorify, and it buried or erased what it wished to forget. In the same way emperors ordered their enemies' faces chiseled off statues, entire events could be omitted from public record. This practice was known as damnatio memoriae, the condemnation of memory. If an emperor was disgraced, his name and images were systematically destroyed. If a legion suffered catastrophic failure, its fate might vanish from the annals. The case of the Ninth Legion, once proud and decorated, vanished from written history sometime after 120 CE. The last solid record places them in Britain, around 108 CE, repairing a stone fortress in York. After that, silence. No Roman historian tells us of their fate. No inscription commemorates their victories or laments their defeat. Unlike other legions, the Ninth left no trace of transfer orders or deployments elsewhere. To later generations, this absence was shocking. How could an entire legion disappear without Rome acknowledging it? The answer lies not in mystery, but in deliberate omission. Shame and silence. The Roman Empire thrived on a narrative of invincibility. Its legions were the hammer of civilization, feared across the known world. When a legion was destroyed, it represented not just military loss, but ideological catastrophe. This was especially true in the case of Britain. Conquering the island had been a struggle from the start. Julius Caesar's expeditions faltered. Claudius's invasion succeeded only through overwhelming force. Revolts like that of Boudica revealed the fragility of Roman control. To admit that a full legion had been wiped out by northern tribes would be to admit that Rome's grip on Britain was tenuous at best. Thus, silence became policy. By erasing the Ninth, Rome erased the embarrassment. The precedent of erasure. The Ninth was not the first to vanish. Other legions, too, disappeared from record after catastrophic defeats. Legio, 17, 18, and 19, all annihilated in the Teutoburg forest in 09 CE by Germanic tribes. Rome never reconstituted them. Their numbers were retired in shame. Legio, 22 Dioteriana, likely destroyed in Judea, around 132 CE. It vanishes from records with no explanation. In each case, Rome avoided publicizing the disaster. Silence was a strategy. By contrast, victories were shouted from every stone and arch. The Ninth's disappearance fits this pattern. A quiet burial of failure. Hadrian's arrival. The timing of the Ninth's disappearance aligns with Emperor Hadrian's reign. Known for consolidating rather than expanding Rome's empire, Hadrian focused on fortifying borders instead of chasing conquest. When he visited Britain around 122 CE, he ordered the construction of Hadrian's Wall. A physical admission that Rome would not conquer the northern tribes. Many historians believe the Ninth's destruction directly influenced this decision. Hadrian, ever concerned with the empire's image, had reason to suppress mention of the legion's loss. Better to show the wall as a symbol of Roman strength than to admit it was built as a reaction to humiliating defeat. The bureaucracy of forgetting Rome. As silence was not casual, it was bureaucratic. Legions were tracked carefully. Their movements, deployments, and honors were inscribed on monuments and documents. For the Ninth to vanish so cleanly required intentional omission. Inscriptions stop naming the legion. Official records cease referencing it. Later Roman writers, even those who loved recounting military struggles, omit their story entirely. It was as though scribes were instructed, do not speak of them, do not write of them. They no longer exist. The psychological power of silence. But erasure is not only practical, it is psychological. By refusing to acknowledge the Ninth's fate, Rome controlled the narrative. The absence itself sent a message. This legion is unworthy of remembrance. Their loss does not deserve to be immortalized. In this way, silence became a form of punishment. Other legions that fought bravely and perished might be honored. The Ninth, by contrast, was denied even that. This punishment extended beyond the soldiers themselves. Families of the legionaries' wives, children, parents, were denied closure. No official tombs, no inscriptions, no acknowledgement of sacrifice. Their sons and husbands simply vanished into nothingness. The echo of forgotten names. Yet, as often happens, the more something is suppressed, the more fascination it generates. Rome's silence about the Ninth gave birth to centuries of speculation. Had they been destroyed in battle against the Caledonians? Had they been transferred to another frontier and perished elsewhere? Or had they simply been disbanded, their name erased in shame? Each theory thrived precisely because Rome refused to answer. The silence became a fertile ground for myth. Control of history. The story of the Ninth illuminates a larger truth about empires. They control history not only by what they remember, but by what they choose to forget. Rome understood this well. To maintain an image of eternal dominance, failures had to be hidden. An empire that prided itself on invincibility could not allow the narrative of vulnerability to spread. Thus, the Ninth became a casualty not only of battle, but of propaganda. Their fate was sealed twice, once in the fields of Britain, and again in the archives of Rome. Modern reflections on erasure today. Historians study the Ninth as much for their absence as for their presence. Their vanishing illustrates how fragile history can be, how easily the record can be manipulated. Rome was not unique. Many civilizations, past and present, have chosen to erase inconvenient truths. Documents vanish. Records are rewritten. Defeats are hidden. Entire peoples can be forgotten if it serves power. The Ninth is a stark reminder. History is not simply what happened. It is what is remembered and what is deliberately forgotten. The shadow legacy. Ironically, Rome's attempt to erase the Ninth ensured their immortality. Other legions that served faithfully are remembered only in dusty inscriptions. The Ninth, by contrast, became legend. Their absence is more powerful than presence. Their silence louder than words. By erasing them, Rome gave them myth. Conclusion of Chapter 12. The Ninth Legion's disappearance is not just about men lost in battle. It is about memory, shame, and power. Rome, unwilling to admit defeat, buried them in silence. But silence is never empty. Out of that silence grew legends of betrayal, curses, and ghostly marches. Out of silence came centuries of speculation and fascination. Out of silence, the Ninth lived on. Rome's erasure did not destroy the myth, transformed them. For as long as we tell their story, they are not forgotten. Chapter 13. The Archaeological Trail. The disappearance of the Ninth Legion is not just a puzzle of text. It is also a mystery written in stone, soil, and silence. Historians may argue over manuscripts, but archaeologists dig through the earth itself, hoping that the ground will reveal what the records conceal. This chapter follows the spade and the trowel, exploring the traces of the Ninth Legion left in Britain and beyond, and asking, does the earth confirm Rome's silence, or contradict it? The last solid footprint, York's the strongest evidence for the Ninth's existence in Britain comes from Abraham, modern-day York, around 108 CE. Inscriptions tell us the Ninth was stationed there, working on repairs to the fortress. Stone altars, dedicatory slabs, and tile stamps bearing the legion's name XHISP, Legio Nona, Hispana, anchor them in this place and time. These are not vague whispers. They are physical, carved affirmations. But then, suddenly, after this date, their name disappears. Later building inscriptions at York are made by other legions, like the 6th Victrix, which arrived in Britain around 122 CE. So the question arises, what happened between 108 and 122? The silent fortress York itself holds tantalizing clues. Archaeologists have found layers of destruction within the fortress, wall signs of fire, rebuilding, and hurried repair. Some have interpreted this as evidence of attack, perhaps a rebellion, by northern tribes that overwhelmed the Ninth. But the evidence is not definitive. Fires could be accidental. Rebuilding could be routine. Archaeology rarely shouts. It whispers. And in the case of York, the whispers leave us with more questions than answers. Marching north beyond York, archaeologists have searched for signs of the Ninth marching into the northern wilds of Britain toward modern Scotland, where hostile tribes like the Caledonians resisted Roman expansion. Here, the trail grows cold. Temporary marching camps exist, forts dot the landscape, but few inscriptions survive, and none explicitly tie the Ninth to these northern outposts. Some scholars imagine the Ninth marching into Scotland, building camps, and vanishing in a catastrophic ambush. But the soil has not yet yielded evidence of a massacre. No mass graves, no abandoned Roman weaponry, no burnt-out camps filled with corpses. If the Ninth was destroyed in the north, they left remarkably little behind. The problem of preservation. One reason for this silence is simply time. Nearly 2,000 years have passed since the Ninth's disappearance. Britain's wet climate, shifting soils, and later building activity obscured the past. Unlike desert sites in Egypt or Syria, where bones and papyri can survive millennia, the British landscape erases traces quickly. Wood rots, iron rusts, human remains dissolve. Even stone fortifications vanish under centuries of reuse. Thus, archaeology here is a fragile tool. The absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. The inscriptions stop. Perhaps the most powerful archaeological clue is what is not found. After 108 CE, inscriptions naming the Ninth Seas altogether. Roman legions were proud of their work. They carved their names into altars, milestones, and fortresses. The absence of the Ninth's name after this date is not random, it is systemic. When the Sixth Victrix replaced them at York, their name appears everywhere, but the Ninth vanished. This silence in stone mirrors the silence in text. A legion transferred. Some scholars have argued that the Ninth was not destroyed in Britain at all. Instead, they suggest the legion was transferred elsewhere in the empire. Hints exist. Tile stamps bearing Leg X have been found as far away as Nijmegen in the Netherlands. Some speculate these belonged to the Ninth. Others argue they could be relics brought there after disbandment. But here too, the evidence is thin. No firm inscription names the Ninth in later postings. No military diplomas list them after 120 CE. If they left Britain, they did so quietly and vanished just as completely abroad. The archaeological silence of battle. If the Ninth perished in a catastrophic defeat in Britain, where are the remains? At the Teutoburg forest in Germany, where 3 Roman legions were annihilated in 09 CE. Archaeology has uncovered spearheads, bones, coins, and altars. The soil itself testifies to the disaster. But in Britain, no such battlefield has been found. No mass graves, no shattered weapons, no debris of war. This absence troubles the theory of annihilation. Could the Caledonians really have destroyed a legion so completely that no archaeological trace remains? Some suggest the bodies were burned, or scattered, or left in bogs, where the acidic soil consumed them. Others argue the legion may not have been wiped out in a single battle, but ground down over years of attrition, leaving no one dramatic site to excavate. The arrival of the Sixth Archaeology does, however, confirm the arrival of Legio VI in Britain around 122 CE. They took over York, expanded Hadrian's Wall, and left inscriptions everywhere. This is crucial. A legion was only moved into Britain to replace another. If the Ninth had been strong, there would have been no need. Their disappearance created a vacuum that had to be filled. Thus, while archaeology cannot prove the Ninth's destruction, it demonstrates the consequences. The arrival of a replacement. The debate of Nijmegen, of the most debated finds, comes from Nijmegen, in the Netherlands. Bricks and tiles stamped with Leg X were discovered there, suggesting the Ninth may have been stationed at the Rhine frontier. If true, this would mean the legion was transferred out of Britain, perhaps to reinforce the empire against Germanic tribes. In that case, their disappearance might have occurred in continental Europe, not the British Isles. But again, caution is needed. Roman materials often traveled far from their source. Stamped tiles could have been moved long after the legion's disappearance, without inscriptions, naming commanders, or dates. The evidence is ambiguous. The mystery of the missing tombs, one of the strangest. Silences is the absence of tombstones for the men of the Ninth. Roman soldiers often had funerary monuments erected by comrades or family recording their legion in service. 4 other legions, destroyed in disasters. Tombs exist elsewhere, erected by survivors or grieving families. For the Ninth, none have been found beyond their early postings. This suggests a deliberate suppression. Families may have been discouraged or forbidden from erecting monuments. Rome's silence extended even to the stones of the dead. The North reveals little in recent decades. Archaeologists have scoured northern Britain for evidence of the Ninth's fate. Excavations at forts, camps, and battlefields continue. But results remain thin. Every new dig carries hope, perhaps a mass grave, a hoard of abandoned equipment, a dedicatory slab naming the Ninth. But each year, the soil gives little away. Some believe the key lies undiscovered beneath modern towns or farmlands. Others think the evidence was erased by later Roman construction, or lost entirely to time. The North keeps its secret. Archaeology versus legend. Interestingly, archaeology has also fueled legend. The absence of hard evidence allows stories to flourish. Writers and filmmakers imagine the Ninth marching into the mist, swallowed by forests and ghosts. Had archaeologists uncovered a battlefield strewn with Roman remains, the mystery would end. Instead, their silence keeps the story alive. The trail beyond Britain. Few scholars suggest the Ninth survived long after Britain. Some propose they were moved east, perhaps to fight in Judea or Armenia. Others speculate they were annihilated in Parthia during Rome's Eastern Wars. But archaeology again fails us here. No inscriptions, no tombs, no altars tie the Ninth to the east. Their name disappears entirely, as if struck from the map. This absence makes their story unique. Other destroyed legions left traces of their end. The Ninth left none. The archaeological paradox. Thus, archaeology leaves us with a paradox. On one hand, it confirms the Ninth's presence in Britain until about 108 CE. On the other, it provides no evidence of their destruction, no graves, no battlefield, no final inscription. This paradox mirrors the written record: presence, then silence. The two strands of evidence, text and stone, reinforce each other not by what they say, but by what they omit. The work continues. Archaeology is not static. New discoveries happen constantly. A stone altar unearthed in a farmer's field, a buried camp revealed by aerial photography, a coin hoard uncovered by metal detectors. Any one of these could hold the key. The soil of Britain is vast. Somewhere, perhaps, lies the Ninth's final testimony. Until then, archaeologists keep digging, and each silence they unearth is as haunting as any discovery. Conclusion of Chapter 13. The archaeological trail of the Ninth is not a clear road, but a series of sudden stops and silences. In York, their name is carved proudly in stone. Beyond that, the earth grows quiet. No graves, no battlefields, no transfer inscriptions, nothing but the void. But in history, silence can speak. The absence of the Ninth in both text and soil tells its own story. That Rome wanted them forgotten, and that the land itself has conspired to keep their secret. And so archaeologists continue their patient hunt, guided not by certainty, but by the hope that the ground might one day whisper the truth of the Ninth Legion's fate. Chapter 14. The northern tribes and the enemies view. The story of the Ninth Legion has so far been told through Roman Isar, their inscriptions, their silences, their historians. But history is rarely one-sided. To understand what may have happened to the Ninth, we must also look north, beyond the frontiers of empire, into the forests, moors, and mountains where the tribes of Britain lived. These were the peoples Rome called barbarians, but they were not faceless enemies. They were warriors, farmers, spiritualists, poets of oral tradition, and fierce defenders of their lands. If the Ninth Legion truly vanished in the wilds of Britain, it was at the hands of these northern tribes. This chapter turns the lens outward, reconstructing the world of Rome's adversaries, The Caledonians, the Maetai, and the many other confederations of tribes that resisted Roman domination, and asks, could they have been strong enough, united enough, to destroy a Roman legion? The Roman view of the other, the Romans, like many empires, painted their enemies in broad, often demeaning strokes. The tribes of northern Britain were described as savage, primitive, and chaotic. Tacitus, writing of his father-in-law, Agricola's campaigns, described them as red-haired giants who painted themselves for war and hurled themselves recklessly into battle. But Roman descriptions must be read with skepticism. These accounts were written by conquerors, men who sought to justify their own wars. To cast their enemies as wild and uncivilized was to make Roman conquest appear righteous. Archaeology and anthropology suggest a different picture: societies that were highly organized, adaptive, and capable of uniting when faced with external threats. The Caledonians, the term Caledonian was used broadly by the Romans to describe tribes living north of the Fourth Clyde Line, in what is now Scotland. This was not one kingdom, but a confederation of tribes, who shared cultural traits, alliances, and a common resistance to Rome. The Caledonians were skilled at guerrilla tactics, using their intimate knowledge of forests, mountains, and marshes to ambush Roman columns. They were lightly armed compared to Roman legionaries, but this gave them speed and flexibility. Archaeological evidence shows fortified hill forts, farming communities, and networks of trade. They were not primitive savages, but organized societies with complex social structures. The Picts, and their roots later from the 3rd century onwards. We hear of the Picts, often thought to be descendants of these Caledonian tribes. Their name, meaning painted people, likely refers to their use of body paint or tattoos, a practice already noted by earlier Roman writers. While the Picts emerged in the historical record too late to have directly fought the Ninth, their culture provides continuity, evidence of warrior traditions, tribal alliances, and a fierce independence that stretched back centuries. Thus, when we speak of the Caledonians confronting the Ninth, we are speaking of the ancestors of the Picts. Guerrilla tactics. Rome versus the land. The greatest weapon of the tribes was not their sword or spear, but their land. The rugged north of Britain was treacherous for organized armies. Roman legions marched in heavy armor, burdened by baggage trains, dependent on roads and supply lines. The Caledonians, by contrast, were swift and mobile. They struck an ambush, disappeared into forests, and attacked supply lines. They knew the terrain intimately, using it as both shield and weapon. Roman accounts often complain of hit-and-run tactics, night raids, and feigned retreat strategies that exhausted the Romans and eroded their morale. For a legion to vanish, it did not need to be destroyed in a single great battle. It could have been ground down, ambushed repeatedly, its numbers dwindling until it ceased to function as a fighting force. The Battle of Mons Graupius 83 CE. The most famous Roman account of the northern tribes is Tacitus's description of the Battle of Mons Graupius, fought around 83 CE. Here, the Roman governor Agricola confronted a massive tribal force. Tacitus claims that 30,000 Caledonians faced 20,000 Romans and auxiliaries. The Romans, of course, claimed victory, but the Caledonians were not annihilated. They withdrew into the highlands, conserving their strength. This battle shows that the tribes could assemble large confederations when needed. If they could field 30,000 warriors in the late 1st century, what might they have mustered a few decades later, when the Ninth marched north? The role of confederations, one of the greatest dangers Rome faced, was when disparate tribes united. Normally, tribal societies were fragmented, more concerned with local rivalries than foreign invaders. Rome exploited this, making treaties with some, fighting others, keeping them divided. But occasionally, charismatic leaders or shared crises forged unity. The Esseni Rebellion under Boudica 60 CE had shown Rome the danger. When tribes banded together, they could overwhelm even Rome's finest legions. It is possible that the Ninth faced a similar confederation in the north. If multiple tribes combined forces, even a legion could be swallowed whole. The enemy's motivation: why resist Rome? What drove the tribes to risk annihilation against the empire's might? The answer lies in more than land. To the tribes, Rome was not just a conqueror, was a destroyer of ways of life. Roman conquest meant taxes, slavery, conscription, and the dismantling of tribal power. It meant the imposition of foreign gods, foreign laws, and foreign rulers. For a tribal warrior, resistance was not simply political, it was existential. To fight Rome was to fight for identity, tradition, and survival. This explains the ferocity with which they resisted, even against overwhelming odds. The enemy's view of Rome through archaeological and anthropological reconstruction. We can imagine how the tribes saw the Ninth Legion. To them, the Romans were not invincible demigods, but heavily burdened foreigners, marching slowly, bound by discipline, tied to supply lines. Their armor gleamed, but it weighed them down. Their formations were rigid, but predictable. The tribes respected Roman discipline, but they saw its weaknesses. They knew that to fight Rome in pitched battle was dangerous. But to fight Rome in forests, swamps, and hills on their own terms was to turn Rome's strength into weakness. Ambushes in the north. Some historians suggest the Ninth may have marched into hostile territory without adequate support. Imagine a column of legionaries threading through a narrow pass. Their scouts ambushed, their baggage train cut off. The Caledonians would strike from all sides, showering the Romans with javelins and stones, charging into their flanks, vanishing before a counterattack could be mounted. For days, weeks, even months, this could continue, bleeding the legion until it collapsed. Such a campaign would leave little archaeological trace, no single battlefield, just scattered deaths across miles of wilderness. The oral tradition of the tribes. Fortunately, the tribes left no written records. Their stories were oral, carried in memory and song. If they did annihilate the Ninth, it would have been celebrated in tribal lore, sung by bards around fires. But Rome did not preserve these stories. To Rome, the voices of the defeated or the victorious barbarians were unworthy of record. Thus, the tribe's version of events has been silenced by time. One can only imagine the pride of a Caledonian chieftain boasting that his people destroyed a Roman legion. For him, it would have been proof that Rome was not invincible, that the empire's grip could be broken. The psychological war. The disappearance of the Ninth may not have been just a military loss. For the tribes, it would have been a psychological triumph. To say we destroyed a Roman legion would echo across generations. A tale to inspire warriors and terrify enemies. Even if no written record survives, the silence of Rome itself suggests the tribes achieved something extraordinary. Rome could not or would not acknowledge such humiliation. The aftermath. Did victory strengthen the tribes? If the tribes did annihilate the Ninth, what happened next? Paradoxically, victory may not have been an unqualified blessing. Rome's response to defeat was often brutal. A destroyed legion was usually avenged with overwhelming force. But here, too, the record is murky. Hadrian's decision to build his famous wall around 122 CE suggests that Rome recognized the northern frontier was unconquerable. Instead of punishing the tribes with another grand invasion, Rome built defenses, containing them. In this light, the Ninth's fate may have been part of the reason Rome chose walls over conquest. To illustrate, let us imagine how a Caledonian elder might have told the story. They came in their iron shells, walking like cattle in rows, their standards high, their trumpets crying. We watched from the hills. We struck at night, when their fires were low. We cut their wagons loose. We starved them of grain. They bled slowly, like a stag with many wounds. When at last they turned to flee, we closed in from all sides. Their iron could not save them. Their standards fell, their cries filled the glen, and the mist swallowed them. The eagle of Rome was ours. Such a tale, though lost to time, may once have been sung. In the broader history of Rome, the northern tribes of Britain may seem like footnote small peoples on the edge of empire, but their defiance was significant. They resisted Rome for centuries. Even after Hadrian's Wall, Rome never fully subdued them. Later in the 4th and 5th centuries, as Rome weakened, northern tribes raided southward, reminding the empire that its control had always been precarious. Thus, the disappearance of the Ninth may not be an isolated event, but part of a larger pattern: Rome's failure to fully dominate northern Britain. Chapter 15. Theories of Annihilation. The disappearance of the Ninth Legion remains one of history's great enigmas. A full Roman legion of force of some 5,000 men, along with officers, engineers, servants, and camp followers, simply vanished. From the record, no surviving Roman text gives us a clear answer. No battlefield has been found with the remains of thousands of soldiers. No definitive inscription tells us their end. Instead, there is silence and emptiness that has provoked speculation for centuries. Over time, historians, archaeologists, novelists, and even filmmakers have offered theories, each one attempting to solve the riddle. Some claim the legion was annihilated in Britain by rebellious tribes. Others suggest it was redeployed elsewhere, only to fall in obscurity on a different frontier. Still others argue that it was quietly disbanded, absorbed, or erased from history by Rome itself. This chapter examines the leading theories, one by one, weighing their evidence and their plausibility, and asking, what is the most likely fate of the Ninth Legion? 1. The British annihilation theory. Perhaps the most dramatic and popular theory is that the Ninth was wiped out in northern Britain, somewhere beyond the line of Roman control. The case for annihilation: historical context. Around 117 to 122 CE, the northern tribes were still resisting Rome. The Caledonians, Maetai, and others had fought Agricola decades earlier and were far from subdued. Hadrian's Wall. In 122 CE, Emperor Hadrian ordered the construction of his famous wall across northern Britain. Why? Many scholars argue that a catastrophic loss, such as the annihilation of a legion, convinced Rome that conquest of the north was futile, prompting a defensive strategy instead. Inscriptions ceasing. The last known inscription of the Ninth in Britain dates from around 108 CE in York. After that, silence. It is as though they vanished into the mists. The scenario according to this theory: the Ninth marched north on campaign, perhaps to quell a rebellion, perhaps to strike into Caledonian territory, and never returned. Ambushed in hostile terrain, harried by guerrilla attacks, or encircled in a pitched battle, the legion was destroyed. The tribes may have scattered the dead, looted the standards, and obliterated the evidence. Rome, humiliated, may have chosen silence rather than admit that an entire legion had been lost in Britain. Strengths of the theory fits with the disappearance of the legion from British records. Explains Hadrian's sudden defensive wall, consistent with Rome's tendency to suppress embarrassing defeats. Weaknesses: no archaeological battlefield has ever been found. Later evidence, inscriptions in the Netherlands and Germany, may suggest the Ninth survived past Britain. 2. The transfer theory. In other theory argues that the Ninth was not destroyed in Britain at all, but rather redeployed to another province. The evidence: inscriptions. Some inscriptions found in Nijmegen, in modern Netherlands, suggest elements of the Ninth were stationed there around 120 CE. This could mean the legion was transferred from Britain, rather than annihilated. Patterns of deployment. Rome often moved legions between provinces. It would not have been unusual for the Ninth to be redeployed as needs arose elsewhere in the empire. The scenario: the legion leaves Britain sometime after 108 CE, likely under Emperor Trajan or Hadrian, and is stationed in the Rhine frontier. From there, its trail grows faint. Some suggest it was later sent east, perhaps to Judea or Parthia, where records are incomplete. In this telling, the Ninth did not vanish in glory or catastrophe, but in bureaucratic obscurity, slowly absorbed into other units, or destroyed in a campaign, unrecorded. Strengths supported by inscriptions outside Britain explains why Hadrian could still mount defensive measures without Britain having suffered a disaster. Weaknesses. The Nijmegen inscriptions may refer only to detachments vexations of the Ninth, not the entire legion. Does not explain the complete disappearance of the legion after 130 CE3. The quiet disbandment theory. Some historians propose a less dramatic fate. The Ninth was simply disbanded. The evidence. Administrative gaps. Rome occasionally disbanded legions that were disgraced, depleted, or redundant. Such acts were sometimes left unrecorded. Political motivation. If the Ninth had mutinied, rebelled, or suffered a humiliating but minor defeat, Rome might have erased it from the rolls quietly. The scenario. The legion dwindled through attrition, desertion, or defeat in small skirmishes. Its numbers fell too low to function as a unit. Rome quietly absorbed the survivors into other legions, disbanded the standard, and pretended the legion had never existed. Strengths. Explains the lack of evidence for a single catastrophic event. Fits with Rome's bureaucratic tendencies. Weaknesses. Difficult to prove. Silence could mean many things. Does not explain why Hadrian's Wall was built so soon after. 4. The continental annihilation theory. Another possibility is that the Ninth survived Britain, was redeployed, and met its end elsewhere. The eastern frontier. Some argue the Ninth may have been sent east to fight in the Parthian Wars, or in Judea. Both were theaters of ferocious conflict, where legions were known to be destroyed. The Rhine and Danube. Others suggest the legion fought against Germanic tribes, or along the Danube frontier, where several Roman units were annihilated in the 2nd century. The scenario. The Ninth, leaving Britain, is transferred to one of Rome's hot zones. There, in some forgotten clash, it was destroyed, not dramatically enough to be remembered, or remembered in records that have not survived. Strengths. Matches Rome's need for manpower in volatile regions. Explains the lack of British evidence. Weaknesses. No inscription confirms the legion's presence in the East. Later histories make no mention of the Ninth in major wars abroad. 5. The erasure theory. A more radical theory is that Rome deliberately erased the Ninth from history. The premise. Sometimes suppressed records of disgraceful defeats. If the Ninth suffered a humiliating disaster, the Senate or emperors might have ordered its memory obliterated. Strengths. Fits with Rome's culture of honor and shame. Explains the total silence of sources. Weaknesses. Rome often did record defeats, even humiliating ones. For example, the Teutoburg disaster of 09 CE. Why erase this one? 6. The hybrid theory. It is also possible that multiple factors combined. The legion may have been weakened in Britain, partially destroyed in rebellion, then withdrawn, and finally erased in bureaucratic silence. This hybrid theory fits the scattered evidence. Defeat in Britain could explain its disappearance from inscriptions there. Surviving fragments may have been redeployed to the continent. Eventually, the remnants faded away, too weak to carry the proud name Ninth. Why the mystery endures. What makes the Ninth's fate so haunting is not only the lack of evidence, but the clash of possibility and silence. Historians crave certainty. Empires crave clarity, but the Ninth offers neither. Instead, it lingers as a ghost, a shadow at the edge of Roman history. This silence invites imagination. Novelists, filmmakers, and historians fill the gap with stories. A doomed march into the mist, a heroic last stand, or a quiet absorption into the empire's vast machine. Each theory tells us as much about our own need for stories as it does about the legion itself. The psychological impact of theories. Every theory carries a different emotional weight. Annihilation in Britain is dramatic, a tale of hubris and defeat. At the edge of empire. Redeployment is anticlimactic, a reminder that not all mysteries end in glory. Erasure is chilling, a testament to how easily history can be silenced. The fact that we still debate these theories 2,000 years later speaks to the enduring allure of mystery. The Ninth's disappearance is not just history, it's legend. Conclusion of Chapter 15. The fate of the Ninth Legion cannot be proven with certainty. Each theory has evidence, and each has holes. Perhaps they were annihilated by northern tribes, their bodies swallowed by British bogs and forests. Perhaps they were transferred, only to die in a forgotten campaign. Perhaps they were quietly erased from history, denied even the dignity of remembrance. In the end, the truth may lie between these theories, but what matters, perhaps more than the answer, is the question itself. For the disappearance of the Ninth reminds us that even the mightiest empires leave gaps in their records, mysteries that defy certainty, and in those gaps, legends are born. Chapter 16. Rome's response and the building of Hadrian's Wall. The disappearance of the Ninth Legion, whether by annihilation, transfer, or quiet erasure, left ripples across the empire. Rome, after all, was not merely a military machine. It was a political, psychological, and symbolic empire. Every loss, especially the loss of an entire legion, shook confidence in Roman invincibility. The most tangible response to the disappearance was monumental, the construction of Hadrian's Wall. Yet the wall was not simply a military structure. It was a statement of policy, a symbol of Rome's limits, and perhaps even an admission of defeat. In this chapter, we explore how Rome reacted to the Ninth's fate through politics, propaganda, architecture, and military restraint. How Hadrian's Wall became one of the most enduring monuments of Roman Britain. 1. The political climate. After the Ninth, the early 2nd century CE was a time of transition for the Roman Empire. Trajan's expansionist wars, Emperor Trajan 98–117 CE, had stretched Rome's boundaries further than ever before, conquering Dacia and campaigning deep into the east. His reign embodied conquest and aggression. Hadrian's shift. In 117 CE, Trajan's adoptive son Hadrian took the throne. Unlike his predecessor, Hadrian was cautious, pragmatic, and defensive in his approach to empire. The disappearance of the Ninth, whether in Britain or elsewhere, aligned perfectly with Hadrian's worldview. Where Trajan sought to expand, Hadrian sought to consolidate. Hadrian may have seen the NHS fate as proof that some frontiers could not be held indefinitely. 2. Why? Britain mattered. Britain was never the most important province of Rome. Unlike Egypt, it produced no vast grain supply. Unlike Spain, it yielded no massive flow of silver. Unlike the East, it offered no cities rich in ancient culture. Yet Britain mattered for reasons of prestige. Conquered by Claudius in 43 CE, the islands symbolized Rome's ability to bring civilization to the edge of the known world. Losing control of Britain, or even admitting weakness there, would have been politically embarrassing. Thus, if the Ninth really had been destroyed by northern tribes, Rome could not allow that disaster to define its rule. It had to respond not only militarily, but symbolically. 3. The genesis of Hadrian's Wall. When Hadrian visited Britain in 122 CE, he ordered the construction of a massive fortification stretching some 73 miles from coast to coast. The wall was a physical barrier designed to keep hostile tribes at bay. A statement of power, a monumental demonstration that Rome would hold what it had taken, but go no further. A psychological line. For the Romans, it marked civilization from barbarism. For the Britons beyond it, it represented exclusion and defiance. Hadrian's Wall was more than just stone and turf. It was Rome's response to failure, silence, and the mystery left by the Ninth Legion. 4. Construction and design. The wall itself was an astonishing feat of engineering. Length, around 73 miles, 117 kilometers. Height, originally about 15 feet, 4.5 meters. Width, 8 to 10 feet, 2.4 to 3 meters. Fortifications, dotted with forts, mile castles, and watchtowers, manned by thousands of soldiers. Ditch, a wide ditch in front of the wall, added to its defensive strength. The workforce included not only Roman soldiers, but also local labor. The project required years of planning, massive logistics, and imperial funding. Each section bore the stamp of the Legion, responsible for its construction, leaving behind inscriptions that we can still read today. 5. Symbolism of the wall. To understand Hadrian's Wall, one must think beyond military function, the limit of empire. For the first time, Rome acknowledged a boundary it would not cross. Beyond the wall lay tribes that Rome deemed too costly to conquer. An ideological divide. The wall defined the Roman idea of us versus them, citizens versus barbarians. Imperial messaging. For Romans living in Britain, the wall reassured them of order. For enemies across the frontier, it displayed Rome's wealth and endurance. It was, in short, propaganda in stone. 6. The shadow of the Ninth. Though no Roman writer explicitly linked Hadrian's Wall to the Ninth's disappearance, the timing is too close to ignore. The Ninth disappears around 108 to 117 CE. Hadrian arrives 122 CE. The wall begins shortly after his arrival. Even if the Ninth was not destroyed in Britain, its absence by 122 CE was glaring. The legions in Britain had been reduced. The north was unstable. Hadrian's Wall may thus be seen as Rome's response to the void the Ninth left behind. 7. The military reorganization. The loss or departure of the Ninth forced Rome to rethink its military presence in Britain. Reinforcements. New legions were stationed in Britain, such as the 6th Legion Victrix, which replaced the Ninth's old base at York. Defensive strategy, rather than aggressive campaigns, deep into Caledonia. Rome focused on holding central Britain with fortified lines. Auxiliaries. Rome increasingly relied on non-legionary troops, archers, cavalry, and auxiliaries, drawn from across the empire to man the frontier. The military map of Britain was redrawn. 8. The human side of the wall. For the soldiers stationed on Hadrian's Wall, daily life was a blend of monotony, danger, and cultural exchange. Routine, guard duty, training, patrols. Local interactions. Soldiers married local women, traded with Britons, and brought new customs to the region. Religion, shrines to Jupiter, Mithras, and local gods dotted the frontier. The wall became not just a barrier, but a melting pot, place where Roman and native cultures collided and blended. 9. Hadrian's philosophy of defense. The wall embodied Hadrian's philosophy: secure the empire rather than endlessly expand it. Strategic realism. Rome could not conquer everything. Symbolic power. A wall could project authority as effectively as a legion. Imperial pride. Even in retreat, Rome found a way to claim victory by building. This was not resignation, but adaptation. 10. A monument that outlasted Rome. Hadrian's Wall remained in use for centuries, though it was abandoned, rebuilt, and repurposed at different times. Long after the Ninth was forgotten, the wall endured. Medieval reuse. Stones from the wall were reused to build churches, castles, and homes. Modern symbol. Today, the wall is one of Britain's most famous ancient monuments, recognized as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Cultural memory. It represents the line between history and legend, between Rome's power and its limits. 11. The psychological legacy. For Romans in the 2nd century, Hadrian's Wall was reassurance. The empire could control its borders. For us today, it is a reminder of the Ninth's mystery. The wall asks the same question we ask of the Legion. Where does power end? What happens when an empire reaches its limit? Conclusion of Chapter 16. Rome's response to the Ninth's disappearance was not only military, but monumental. By constructing Hadrian's Wall, the empire transformed loss into architecture, silence into stone, The wall was not just a defense, it was an answer. An answer to rebellion, to defeat, to the mystery of the missing legion. Even if the Ninth was not destroyed in Britain, its absence shaped Roman strategy. The legion vanished, but in its place rose one of the most enduring structures of the Roman world. Hadrian's Wall, then, is both tombstone and testimony, a monument to what Rome could achieve, and a silent witness to what Rome could not. Chapter 17. Myth, Memory, and the Ninth in Roman Culture. When an army disappears, it does not vanish only from the battlefield. It vanishes from memory, from records, and from identity. Yet in Rome, where the legion was the very heart of the empire's strength, such a disappearance could never be entirely erased. Even if scribes omitted it, even if emperors suppressed it, whispers would linger. The fate of the Ninth Legion became, in a sense, a legend within Rome itself, not necessarily in the form of heroic epics, but as a cautionary tale, a ghost haunting the collective mind of empire. This chapter explores how Rome remembered the Ninth, or chose not to remember it, and how its disappearance seeped into stories, warnings, and the psychology of empire. 1. The Roman view of defeat. Rome was not a culture that celebrated failure. Inscriptions, monuments, and histories overwhelmingly praised victories, triumphs, and conquest. Triumphs. Generals returning to Rome paraded in gilded chariots, displaying the spoils of war. Arches, victories were etched in stone, immortalizing Roman superiority. Official histories, imperial scribes often downplayed or erased defeats, yet defeats did happen sometimes, catastrophic ones. And the Ninth, in whatever form its end came, stood among these shadows. 2. Other Roman disasters, as comparisons to understand how the Ninth was remembered. We must look at other defeats. The Teutoburg Forest 09 CE. 3 legions under Varus annihilated by Germanic tribes. This disaster shocked Augustus so deeply, he reportedly cried, "Quintilius Varus, give me back my legions." Carrhae, 53 BCE, Crassus lost 7 legions to the Parthians, his army destroyed, his body humiliated. Cannae, 216 BCE, Hannibal slaughtered tens of thousands of Romans. Though Rome ultimately recovered, each of these defeats remained in Roman memory precisely because they were turned into warnings. The Ninth was different. It did not receive a detailed obituary in Roman texts. Its disappearance was quieter, more ambiguous. This silence itself is telling. 3. Silence is strategy. Why would Rome downplay, or even erase the fate of the Ninth? Psychological warfare, admitting that an entire legion had been wiped out by barbarians, would embolden enemies. Imperial image. Emperors like Trajan and Hadrian preferred to emphasize victories, not embarrassing losses. Administrative practicality. Erasing the legion from records avoided awkward questions about accountability. Thus, the Ninth slipped into the shadows, not remembered in the grand annals, but not forgotten in whispers. 4. How soldiers remembered while official Rome was silent. The soldiers themselves surely remembered. Veteran stories. Survivors of campaigns in Britain would tell tales in taverns, on farms, to their children. Superstition. Roman soldiers were deeply religious. The disappearance of a legion could be seen as a curse or divine punishment. Regimental identity. Every legion carried an eagle's standard, a sacred object. If the Ninth's eagle was lost, its absence would haunt Roman camps. For ordinary soldiers, the Ninth may have become a grim tale. Do not end up like the Ninth. 5. The role of inscriptions. Legions left traces not only in battles, but in stone. Building projects, dedications, and tombstones bore their names. The Ninth's last inscriptions in Britain date to the early 2nd century. After that, the trail goes cold. Archaeologists note how strange this is. Legions were usually well documented, their names carved into milestones, barracks, and civic works. The absence of such inscriptions for the ninth after a certain date reflects its vanishing. For later Romans, walking through a city and noticing a missing name might have felt like looking at a gap in a family tree branch cut short. 6. Myths. Among provincials, if Roman writers avoided the subject, provincial populations may not have British tribes for native Britons. The destruction of the ninth, if it happened in the north, would have been a source of pride, a legendary victory against Rome's finest. Local stories, oral traditions might have passed down tales of a great battle where Roman armor littered the fields. Folk memory. In remote communities, the ninth may have become part of myth, the army that came and never returned. These stories, though never written in Roman texts, could have lived on in whispers through generations. 7. Imperial memory. To forget or to warn. Within the imperial court, the ninth may have functioned in two opposite ways. Erasure. Silence ensured that the empire did not dwell on weakness. Whispered warning. Among generals and governors, the ninth's fate may have been a private reminder of the risks of overextension. This duality forgotten publicly, remembered privately, defined the ninth's legacy. 8. The ninth as a teaching tool. Roman military training often emphasized examples, both glorious and disastrous. Cannae taught resilience in the face of annihilation. Teutoburg taught caution in unfamiliar terrain. The ninth, though not openly recorded, may have served as a quiet case study. Never underestimate the tribes of Britain. Thus, even in silence, the ninth may have spoken. 9. Memory and myth-making of our time. Silence itself became fertile ground for myth. The ghost army. Soldiers may have told stories of seeing the ninth march in phantom form across misty fields. The cursed legion. Some may have believed the ninth offended the gods, doomed to vanish as punishment. The eternal patrol. Others could have imagined the legion still fighting beyond the wall, trapped in endless combat against the northern tribes. Romans loved such myths, for they gave meaning to the inexplicable. 10. The ninth in popular imagination of Rome. Though absent from official chronicles, the ninth lingered in the imagination of Rome's common people. Entertainers, poets, actors, or storytellers may have referenced the lost legion in taverns or marketplaces. Superstitions, farmers, or soldiers might have seen bad omens and muttered, "The ninth walks again." Songs, informal ballads, could have transformed the legion into a symbol of tragedy. The ninth became not a record, but a rumor, woven into culture at the edges. 11. Historical erasure. As power Rome's handling of the ninth shows the power of erasure by omitting the legion from texts. The empire tried to control memory, yet silence has its own power. What is unsaid often becomes more haunting than what is told. In this way, the ninth became both erased and unforgettable, like a scar that never fully fades. 12. Archaeology as memory's resurrection. Modern archaeology has, in some sense, reawakened the ninth. Inscriptions at York and Nijmegen give us glimpses of its last movements. Absence in later records reminds us of its vanishing. Excavations of battle sites in northern Britain hint at possible fates. By digging in the soil of Britain, we resurrect the memory Rome once buried. 13. Myth beyond Rome. The ninth's disappearance did not stay confined to Roman memory. Later British legends, medieval chroniclers sometimes told stories of vanished armies. Perhaps echoing the ninth, modern myth, the legion has become the subject of novels, films, and endless speculation. Cultural symbol. Today, the ninth is often invoked as a metaphor for mystery, disappearance, or forgotten history. What Rome silenced, later centuries reimagined. 14. Psychological impact on the empire. The ninth's fate, though muted, likely contributed to a broader imperial anxiety. The frontier is fragile. The wall of conquest was not unbreakable. Barbarians are dangerous, Even Rome's finest could be overwhelmed. Mortality of empire. If a legion could vanish, what else might? Such anxieties simmered beneath the surface of Roman pride. 15. The power of ghost legions in Roman thought. Ghosts and spirits often haunted battlefields. Soldiers carried stories of phantom armies appearing at night. The Ninth, erased from records, was primed to become such a ghost legion. Not written, but whispered. Not celebrated, but feared. Even centuries later, when Hadrian's Wall was manned, soldiers may have told each other, "Beware the fate of the Ninth." Conclusion of Chapter 17. The Ninth Legion's greatest legacy may not be in stone or ink, but in silence. Rome, in trying to erase the disaster, created a vacuum into which myth rushed. The Ninth became a whisper in taverns, a warning in camps, a ghost in the imperial imagination. Its absence was louder than its presence. And so, while official histories barely mention it, the Ninth never truly disappeared. It lived on in the minds of soldiers, provincials, and future generations, an unfinished story, a shadow cast across the empire's pride. Chapter 18. The Ninth, and the Rise of Roman Frontier, Policia. Disappearance of the Ninth Legion was not just a tragedy, it was a lesson. Empires learned from their wounds, and Rome was no different. The loss, whether in the misty hills of northern Britain or on some distant frontier, shaped how the empire viewed its boundaries, its enemies, and its strategies. This chapter examines how the shadow of the Ninth Legion may have contributed to one of Rome's most enduring responses, the development of frontier policy, including the monumental construction of walls, forts, and defense systems that sought to prevent such catastrophes from happening again. 1. The shock of the Ninth's disappearance. Even if Rome tried to erase the Ninth's fate from public records, its absence had practical consequences. Military gaps. A legion was not just 5,000 to 6,000 soldiers. It was a symbol of control, taxation, and order. Its disappearance created power vacuums. Psychological impact. Other legions stationed in Britain and across the empire would have been reminded of their vulnerability. Imperial responsibility. The emperor himself bore responsibility for safeguarding legions. To lose one meant questioning the emperor's competence. Thus, whether whispered in camps or considered in the palace, the Ninth's loss influenced Roman thinking about frontiers. 2. The old Roman strategy, expansion. For centuries, Rome's frontier policy had been simple: keep expanding. Under Caesar, Augustus, and Trajan, conquest was the norm. The legions advanced steadily, pushing borders into Gaul, Spain, Dacia, and beyond. Defense was often secondary. Rome assumed that its strength, momentum, and intimidation were enough. But by the early 2nd century CE, Rome faced the limits of endless expansion. The Ninth's disappearance symbolized this turning point. 3. The shift toward defense. The Ninth's fate coincided with a new imperial philosophy. Hadrian 117 to 138 CE, unlike his predecessor Trajan, who dreamed of empire without limits, Hadrian recognized that Rome could not expand forever. Defensive strategy. He shifted resources from conquest to consolidation, fortifying borders instead of pushing them. The Ninth's lesson. The loss of a full legion in Britain, whether against the Caledonians or another force, proved how vulnerable Rome's northern frontier truly was. Thus, the Ninth became part of the context in which Rome rethought its boundaries. 4. Britain. The crucible of frontier policy. Nowhere was frontier policy more visibly shaped than in Britain. The Caledonian threat. Tribes north of the Roman line were fierce, skilled in guerrilla tactics, and impossible to subdue permanently. Revolts and resistance. The Iceni revolt under Boudica had already proven how unstable Britain could be. The Ninth's destruction or disappearance reinforced this lesson. Hadrian's Wall 122 CE, just a few years after the Ninth vanishes from records. Hadrian visits Britain and orders the construction of a massive defensive wall across the island. The connection is difficult to ignore. 5. Hadrian's Wall. Rome builds in stone stretching 73 miles from coast to coast. Hadrian's Wall was the empire's answer to the threat from the north. Symbolism. A visible statement that Rome was drawing a line not of conquest, but of defense. Practicality. It controlled movement, monitored trade, and deterred raids. Psychological comfort. For soldiers stationed in Britain, the wall was reassurance that the Ninth's fate would not be repeated. In this sense, the Ninth's disappearance directly influenced one of Rome's most iconic constructions, 6 forts, roads, and communication beyond Hadrian's Wall. Rome also strengthened its frontier networks. Forts, stone forts were built at strategic intervals, housing garrisons ready to respond quickly to uprisings. Roads. Roman engineers created fast communication routes, ensuring reinforcements could reach danger zones. Watchtowers. Visual signaling systems allowed information to travel quickly across the frontier. The Ninth had likely been lost because of isolation, cut off, overwhelmed, unable to summon aid. Rome sought to prevent that again. 7. Frontier policy across the empire. The Ninth's fate was not just a British lesson, it influenced Rome everywhere. The Rhine and Danube. In Europe, Rome fortified river frontiers, recognizing that sudden tribal attacks could destroy even strong legions. The East, in Syria and Mesopotamia, Rome built defensive lines against Parthian and later Sassanid incursions. Africa, in desert regions, Rome constructed fortified posts to guard against nomadic raids. The Ninth's disappearance became part of a larger imperial shift. Walls instead of waves, defense instead of destiny. 8. The end of unlimited empire. Disappearance of the Ninth symbolized more than a lost legion. It symbolized the end of Rome's age of reckless expansion. From Augustus to Trajan, Rome had believed no frontier was permanent. From Hadrian onward, Rome began to accept limits, walls, and the reality of defending instead of conquering. Legacy of the Ninth, whether directly or indirectly. The legion's fate played into this psychological transition. Point 9. The Ninth, as a warning for commanders and governors. The Ninth's story, though muted, served as a warning. Do not underestimate tribal resistance. Do not leave legions isolated without reinforcements. Do not assume Rome is invincible. These warnings shaped frontier policy, not just in Britain, but across the empire. 10. Walls as memory. In stone, Hadrian's Wall can be read as a monument, not only to Roman engineering, but also to Roman fear. The fear of losing more legions. The fear of uncontrolled raids. The fear that the empire's reach exceeded its grasp. In this way, the wall itself became a kind of silent memorial to the Ninth stone, where ink had failed. 11. The frontier. Soldier's perspective. For the common soldier manning the frontiers, the Ninth's disappearance was more than abstract policy. Haunted camps. Stories of the lost legion would have circulated among campfires. Daily vigilance. Soldiers were reminded to stay alert, lest they too vanish. Morale. Knowing an entire legion had disappeared was both terrifying and galvanizing. Thus, the Ninth became part of the soldier's mental landscape. Part fear, part motivation. 12. Beyond Britain, the Ninth's echo in provinces far from Britain. The Ninth's story still mattered. Germania. Officers remembered the Teutoburg disaster. The Ninth reinforced caution in wild forests. Eastern legions. Facing Parthians, commanders considered how isolation could doom a legion. Rome itself, senators and emperors discussed strategy with the Ninth's silence as an unspoken backdrop. The disappearance was not just local lit, became part of Rome's global awareness. 13. The Ninth, and the concept of limits. Perhaps the Ninth's greatest legacy was in shaping Rome's concept of limits. Before the empire believed frontiers were temporary, to be pushed outward. After, frontiers were seen as permanent, to be fortified. This shift was revolutionary. The Ninth's loss crystallized the danger of hubris. 14. Memory written in stone, not in books ironically. The Ninth was erased from texts, but etched into stone in another way. The very architecture of frontier defenses, Hadrian's Wall, fortress networks, frontier towns. These constructions were not just military, they were memory. The Ninth lived on in the walls, ditches, and fortifications that Rome raised in its absence. 15. A silent teacher in the end. The Ninth became a teacher, though silently. It taught emperors to temper ambition. It taught generals to reinforce their legions. It taught soldiers to stay vigilant. And it taught Rome itself to build walls, both literal and psychological. Conclusion of Chapter 18. The Ninth Legion vanished from records, but its shadow stretched across the empire. In the stones of Hadrian's Wall, in the forts along the Danube, in the desert posts of Africa, the Ninth's absence was present. Rome did not honor the Ninth with monuments or triumphs. Instead, Rome honored it with walls of fear, walls of memory, walls of policy. In this sense, the legion that disappeared never truly left. Its fate became a silent architect of Rome's frontier strategy, shaping the empire's boundaries for centuries. Chapter 19. Archaeological Clues and the Modern Hunt for the Ninth. The disappearance of the Ninth Legion is one of the greatest mysteries of Roman history. But history is not only told through scrolls and chronicles, it is written in stone, buried in earth, and preserved in fragments scattered across time. Archaeology, with its patient excavation and forensic precision, has become the torch that lights the Ninth's shadowy trail. In this chapter, we journey through the world of archaeological discoveries, inscriptions, artifacts, ruins, and clues that continue to keep the search for the Ninth alive. 1. The absence of records. The first challenge in hunting the Ninth is not what has been found, but what is not. Ancient Roman historians, like Tacitus, Cassius, Dio, and Suetonius, mention Britain, ostensibly but non-explicitly record the Ninth's destruction. Military rolls, which list active legions, drop the Ninth abruptly after the early 2nd century CE. This silence itself became the first clue, a vanishing act in paper form that forced historians to dig in the dirt for answers. Thus, archaeology became the battlefield where the Ninth's fate would be contested. To York, the Ninth's last stronghold. The Ninth Legion's fortress was at Ebracum, modern York. Here, archaeologists uncovered traces that confirmed the Ninth's long presence. Stone inscriptions, building stones stamped with the Ninth's name, Legix Hisp, show the Legion was active in constructing defenses. Ceramic tiles, roof tiles, inscribed with the Legion's mark, were found in York and surrounding sites. Evidence of repair. Archaeological layers show significant rebuilding of the fortress around 108 CE, possibly after damage from a rebellion or attack. York is the last certain place where the Ninth can be located. Beyond it lies mystery. 3. The vanishing trail after York. The Ninth disappears from Britain's archaeological footprint. No later inscriptions, tiles, or building stones bear its name. By the time of Hadrian's Wall, 122 CE, the Ninth are recorded in Britain. This silence is as loud as any find. The Legion simply vanishes from the archaeological record. Did they march north and fall in battle? Were they redeployed abroad? Archaeology offers tantalizing clues. For the Nijmegen inscription, one of the most debated pieces of evidence, comes not from Britain, but from the Netherlands. In Nijmegen, ancient Noviamagus, an inscription discovered in the 1950s refers to officers of Legix Hisp. The stone is dated to around 120 CE, years after the Legion is thought to have disappeared in Britain. Interpretations differ. Evidence of survival. Some argue this proves the Ninth was transferred to the Rhine frontier after Britain fragmentary reassignment. Others argue only parts of the Legion, or its veterans, were present, not the full force. Confusion in records. Roman inscriptions could commemorate individuals long after events, muddying the timeline. The stone remains one of the most hotly contested clues in the Ninth Story. 5. The shadow of rebellion in Britain. Surveys in northern Britain provide indirect evidence. Burn layers excavations show destruction layers in Roman forts north of York around the late 1st and early 2nd century CE. Caledonian resistance. Forts in Scotland were abandoned, suggesting Rome struggled to maintain control. Military redeployment. The sudden withdrawal of Roman presence in northern Britain suggests a major military setback. Some scholars connect these clues with the Ninth's disappearance, perhaps annihilated in one of these uprisings. 6. The Elgin Fort. The Elgin Fort near Edinburgh offers intriguing evidence. Archaeologists uncovered a well-preserved Roman auxiliary fort, dating to the 9th period. Abandoned suddenly, the fort's remains show signs of hurried withdrawal. Weapons, tools, and coins suggest disruption, possibly linked to a failed Roman advance. Though no direct Ninth Legion artifacts were found, the timing aligns with the mystery. 7. The case for disaster in Caledonia. Supporters of the annihilation in Scotland theory highlight absence in later lists. No ninth in Britain after approximately 120 CE. Hadrian's Wall construction, built only years later, possibly in response to disaster. Lack of reassignment evidence. Aside from Nijmegen, little proves the ninth served elsewhere. Thus, archaeology paints a circumstantial case. A legion marched north and never returned. 8. The reassignment hypothesis argue the legion survived and was relocated. Archaeological finds suggest replacements in Britain. Other legions, such as the 6th Victrix, were moved in to fill a gap. Eastern frontier needs. Records show major conflicts with Parthia during this era. Legions were often shifted east. Silence of finds. The ninth's absence from British archaeology might mean transfer, not destruction. In this view, the Nijmegen inscription is not an outlier, but a breadcrumb. 9. The mystery of tombstones and veterans. Roman veterans often left tombstones and memorials marking their legionary service. For the ninth, there are puzzling patterns. Early tombstones. Many ninth veterans are found in Britain before 120 CE. Later silence. Few, if any, tombstones after that date mentioned service in the ninth. Interpretation. If the legion had survived, its veterans should have left traces into the mid-2nd century. Archaeologists interpret this as further evidence of its disappearance. 10. The numismatic silence coins also provide indirect clues. Emperors often commemorated victorious legions on coinage. After the early 2nd century, no Roman coins celebrate the ninth. By the reign of Hadrian, the legion is absent from imperial coin propaganda. The silence of coins reinforces the sense of an erasure. 11. Ghosts in the soil. Archaeological digs across northern Britain have uncovered tantalizing, fragmentary clues, arrowheads in battle layers, mass graves without clear identification, destroyed fortifications. But none have yet yielded the smoking gun, a site where the full ninth perished. The absence keeps the mystery alive. 12. Comparative lessons. Teutoburg Forest, the fate of various legions in Germany offers comparison. Archaeology has uncovered mass graves, weapons, and battlefield remains from the Teutoburg disaster. No such definitive site exists for the ninth. This absence of a battlefield site suggests either the legion was not annihilated in one place, or the evidence remains buried. Undiscovered. 13. The erasure theory. Some archaeologists suggest Rome may have deliberately erased evidence, destroyed records, avoided commemoration, quietly disbanded survivors. In this interpretation, the ninth's disappearance was less about physical annihilation and more about political erasure, vanishing act engineered by the empire itself. 14. Modern archaeology and technology. The search for the ninth continues today, with cutting-edge methods, ground-penetrating radar GPR, used to scan beneath Scottish soil for signs of lost camps or battlefields. LiDAR scanning reveals hidden Roman roads and fortifications under forest canopies. DNA studies remains from potential sites are tested for Mediterranean ancestry, hinting at Roman soldiers. So far, technology has raised hopes, but no definitive answers. 15. The archaeological debate. Archaeology is not silent. It speaks in fragments, but those fragments are debated fiercely. Was the Nijmegen inscription a survival or a memorial? Were northern burn layers signs of Ninth's destruction or routine conflict? Was the silence of tombstones accidental or deliberate? Each discovery becomes a battlefield of interpretation. 16. Public fascination with the ninth. Part of the ninth's allure comes from the fact that archaeology has never fully solved it. Documentaries highlight every new dig in Scotland. Museums featured Ninth Legion tiles and stones as centerpieces. Tourists walk Hadrian's Wall, wondering if its stones were laid in fear of the Ninth's fate. The Legion has become a story, not just of Rome, but of the human imagination. 17. The archaeologist's perspective. For modern archaeologists, the ninth is both a challenge and a curse. Challenge, the thrill of solving one of history's great mysteries. Curse, the constant risk of overinterpreting fragmentary evidence. Yet the pursuit continues, because the ninth offers something rare, a puzzle where every shard matters. 18. The ninth as an ongoing excavation, like other lost legions. The ninth remains alive in the trenches. Every new excavation in Britain and the Rhine is haunted by its ghost. Every stone unearthed may shift the narrative. Every dig raises hope that the battlefield, the massed grave, or the final camp will at last be uncovered. The story is unfinished, written not only by historians, but by archaeologists with shovels in hand. 19. The power of archaeological silence. Sometimes, what is not found speaks louder than what is. No tombstones, no coins, no definitive battlefield. This silence itself tells a story, the story of a legion deliberately erased, or lost so utterly that even the earth has swallowed it whole. 20. Conclusion of chapter 19. The ninth's trail is written not in parchment, but in soil, stone, and silence. In York's fortress, in Nijmegen's inscriptions, in Scotland's ruins, we catch glimpses of its shadow, but archaeology has not yet given us the ending. Instead, it keeps the ninth alive as a mystery, a question, a ghost that still waits beneath the ground. And perhaps that is why the story endures. The Ninth Legion has not been found, but it has never been forgotten. Its silence, its absence, and its fragments continue to speak louder than any intact history. Chapter 20. Legacy and the Myth of the Ninth Legion. The Ninth Legion may have disappeared from history's pages, but paradoxically, its absence has ensured its immortality. A legion that vanished without a trace has become one of Rome's most enduring legends, more alive in myth than it ever was in reality. This chapter explores how the Ninth Legion's story survived across centuries, how it inspired historians, archaeologists, writers, filmmakers, and dreamers, and how its shadow still lingers in our imagination today. 1. The legion that refused to die like Rome's other legions. The ninth is remembered not for its victories, but for its disappearance. Other legions were dissolved, merged, or simply retired, but they left behind records. The ninth's erasure was abrupt, unexplained, and unsettling. It was not destroyed in glorious battle with Rome's enemies, at least, not in any way officially acknowledged. That silence gave birth to something powerful, a legend too. The ninth in Roman memory, in Rome itself. The ninth faded quickly. Official records ceased to mention it after the reign of Hadrian. Its veterans did not leave behind a clear trail of tombstones or commemorations. By the 3rd century CE, the Ninth was a ghost, absent from all lists of legions. Yet absence does not mean oblivion. The silence itself preserved the mystery. 3. Rediscovery in the Renaissance centuries later. When Renaissance scholars pored over Roman texts, they noticed the gap. Tacitus, Cassius, Dio, and later sources spoke of Britain and her legions, but the Ninth vanished from their rolls. Antiquarians began to speculate. Had the legion been lost in Britain, in Parthia? Was it annihilated by barbarians, or simply disbanded in disgrace? The Ninth thus became one of the first historical mysteries to capture the imagination of early historians. 4. The Romantic Era and the Legend of the North by the 18th and 19th centuries. Britain's fascination with Rome was at its height. Ruins were studied, Hadrian's Wall was mapped, and the Ninth's disappearance was woven into the myth of Britain's ancient wilderness. The idea of a Roman legion swallowed by the mists of Caledonia fit perfectly with romantic ideals of nature, tragedy, and mystery. Writers painted Scotland as a graveyard for empire, the place where even Rome faltered. The Ninth became a symbol of imperial overreach and the power of untamed lands. 5. The Ninth in modern literature. The Ninth truly came alive in the 20th century through fiction. Rosemary Sutcliffe's The Eagle of the Ninth, 1954. A young Roman seeks to recover his father's lost legion's standard in the wilds of Britain. The novel, beloved by generations, made the Ninth's mystery accessible to millions. The tale of the missing legion became a popular trope. Countless books, short stories, and historical novels reimagined the Ninth's fate. In fiction, the Ninth never dies, it marches eternally into the mist, waiting for discovery. 6. The silver screen and popular culture. The Ninth's legend leaped onto the screen. Films. The Eagle, 2011. Based on Sutcliffe's novel, dramatized the Legion's disappearance. Other films and series referenced the Ninth as a symbol of Rome's lost might. Television, documentaries, and historical dramas alike feature the Ninth as the Lost Legion. Games, from Total War, Rome to modern RPGs, the Ninth appears as both a playable unit and a mysterious ghost of antiquity. The Legion became part of global pop culture, its absence a story more compelling than many recorded victories. 7. The Ninth, as a metaphor beyond history. The Ninth became metaphorical for empire, a warning that no empire, however mighty, is invincible. For memory, proof that history can be shaped as much by what is forgotten as by what is remembered. For identity, especially in Britain, the Ninth represents the tension between conqueror and land, civilization and wilderness, empire and resistance. The Legion's vanishing resonates because it touches universal themes: pride, loss, and the limits of power. 8. The Ninth and archaeology's allure. Modern archaeology transformed the Ninth into a living quest. Every dig in northern Britain is framed by the possibility of finding the lost Legion. Museums proudly display Ninth Legion inscriptions, tiles, and building stones, keeping public curiosity alive. Tourists walking Hadrian's Wall often ask, was this built because of the Lost Legion? The Ninth is less a closed case than an open wound one. Archaeology cannot fully heal, but keeps alive. 9. The Ninth is a cautionary tale for modern empires and nations. The Ninth has been used as a warning. Britain's colonial thinkers once saw the Ninth's disappearance as symbolic of how native peoples could resist even the greatest power. Military strategists studied the Ninth as a lesson in overextension, reminding armies not to underestimate unfamiliar terrain and determined enemies. Today, the Ninth stands as a reminder that history's victors can still be forgotten, and that might alone does not guarantee survival. 10. The enduring mystery. Its core, the Ninth endures because it is unsolved. If archaeologists tomorrow uncovered a battlefield with Ninth Legion inscriptions, the mystery would be solved, but the magic would vanish. The very absence of proof ensures the Legion's immortality. The Ninth is no longer just a legion of Romet, is a legion of legend. 11. Why we remember the Ninth so? Why does this legion, among dozens, remain etched in memory? Because it vanished. Because its end was not written. Because humans are drawn not only to stories of triumph, but also to stories of disappearance, silence, and the unknown. The Ninth's absence is its greatest legacy. The Ninth Legion, the Legio IX Hispana, marched into history as Rome's instrument of conquest. But in the end, it conquered nothing. Instead, it was conquered by time, by silence, by mystery. And in that silence, it achieved something no other legion did: immortality in legend. Its soldiers are gone, its standards lost, its victories forgotten. Yet the Ninth still marches. Books, in films, in archaeology, in the imagination of every person who hears its name and wonders, what really happened to the Ninth? The truth may remain buried, but the story, the legend, will never die. The shadows of the past never truly fade. They linger, waiting for us to uncover them. Tonight, we've walked through one of history's darkest mysteries, but the truth is, there are countless more hidden in the silence of time. If you felt the chill of the unknown, and you crave more secrets buried beneath blood, legend, and fear, then join us on this journey into the darkness. Subscribe now to Dark History. And remember, sometimes the past doesn't stay buried.